Chapter 998. A total of 7 true fire spirit refinement realm experts were fighting in the West Chu Imperial Palace. Even though they had restrained their strength, they still managed to destroy the entire palace's array. Meng Yuncheng finally couldn't take it anymore. He angrily shouted, "Stop! All of you stop!" This was the West Chu Imperial Palace and he was the West Chu Emperor. In the end, this group of people were fighting in front of him. Was there still any law? Were they not putting him in their eyes? This was too much of a bully. Meng Yuncheng was the emperor after all, and these two groups of people needed his help. Seeing that Meng Yuncheng was truly angry, both sides could only stop. Xiang Chong saw that Shen Baochen and Yan Ji had retreated and he let out a sigh of relief. If they had continued fighting, he would have died here. At this time, Yuan Fu was staring at Dong Huang Tai. Who would believe you? Who was the one who said they wouldn't fight? Dong Huang Tai sensed Yuan Fu's gaze. He shrugged and pointed at Senior Qing, implying that he would only promise that he wouldn't attack, but if that old man wanted to cause trouble for him, he couldn't just let himself be captured, could he? Meng Yuncheng let out a long sigh and said, "I say everyone, can't we just talk things out? Why do you have to fight? My West Chu is a small country and you want to force this emperor to take a side. This emperor doesn't know what to do." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "I know this is difficult for your majesty, so I won't make any promises. I just want to ask your majesty a few questions." Meng Yuncheng was stunned and said, "Official Chu, please speak." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Between the righteous and demonic sects, your majesty doesn't need to consider the matters of the pugilistic world. The pugilistic world is the pugilistic world and the court is the court. I just want to ask your majesty, without considering the righteous and demonic sects, if Eastern Qi attacks the Northern Yan, will West Chu help or not?" Meng Yuncheng immediately said, "Help. Of course we have to help, the teeth are cold without the lips. If the Northern Yan is destroyed, with our West Chu's strength, we will be destroyed within 3 months with 100% certainty." Meng Yuncheng was very clear about his own power. Sometimes, the Northern Yan called themselves the Great Yan, and sometimes, the Eastern Qi called themselves the Great Qi. Only West Chu, whether it was internally or externally, would always call themselves West Chu. They had never called themselves the Great Chu, because they knew that with West Chu's power, they could not afford to be called great. Chu Xiu asked again, "Then, your majesty, do you think that Eastern Qi will be coerced and controlled by the Jianghu forces after so many years of dealing with Eastern Qi?" Meng Yuncheng thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Of course not. As the overlord of the Central Plains, the Eastern Qi Imperial Court, the Eastern Qi Imperial family is definitely not weak. And Lord Chu, to put it bluntly, don't think that you're the supreme leader of the martial arts world in the land of Northern Yan, ruling over the Jianghu of Northern Yan. But in the Northern Yan Imperial Court, you don't have the final say, do you? You can support a direct descendant of the Xiong Imperial family to ascend to the throne, but don't even think about supporting a branch to ascend to the throne. Only when what you do does not cross the bottom line of the Northern Yan Imperial Court, and is in line with their interests, will there be no conflict between you two. Otherwise, the Northern Yan Imperial family will not allow the power to fall into the hands of an outsider, even at the cost of a life-and-death struggle." Hearing Meng Yuncheng's words, Xiang Chong couldn't help but puff out his chest. As an emperor, Meng Yuncheng could see these things clearly, even more clearly than Xiang Chong. This time, when Chu Xiu helped Xiang Li seize the throne, it was within the bounds of the rules. That was why he could succeed and gain the approval of the entire Northern Yan Imperial Court. But if he did not follow the rules and supported a person who was not qualified to ascend to the throne, or an outsider to ascend to the throne, he would definitely suffer the backlash of the entire Northern Yan Imperial family and the Imperial Court, even to the point of a life-and-death struggle. After he finished speaking, Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "If that's the case, then why is your majesty still hesitating? Has your majesty not seen the cause and effect of this?" Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Meng Yuncheng's expression changed slightly. Clearly, he had thought of something. Meng Yuncheng was not a mediocre person. On the contrary, he was much smarter than Lu Haochang, and more daring. It was just that Western Chu was inherently weak. Even if it was a hero like Xiang Long, he would not be able to reverse the situation. Therefore, after careful consideration, Meng Yuncheng understood the meaning of Chu Xiu's words. If Eastern Qi attacked Northern Yan, Western Chu would not sit idly by, just like the war between the three countries. No matter what promises Eastern Qi made, Western Chu would not believe them. On the contrary, if Northern Yan was more powerful than Eastern Qi, then Western Chu would help Northern Yan. This time, Meng Yuncheng was hesitant because it was not only because of the interests and grudges between the three countries, but also because of the Jianghu, as well as the conflict between the Orthodox and the Devil. That was why Meng Yuncheng was so hesitant. But Chu Xiu's second question reminded him that the Jianghu was the Jianghu, and the imperial court was the imperial court. The two could work together, but they should also look at each other separately. The orthodox martial arts world could not influence the decisions of the Eastern Qi imperial court. Now, both sides were working together because they had a common goal. The orthodox martial arts world wanted to destroy Chu Xiu, the Devil, and Eastern Qi was coveting Northern Yan. If Western Chu did not intervene this time and allowed Eastern Qi to destroy Northern Yan, then Eastern Qi's next target would be Western Chu. Just like what Meng Yuncheng said, at that time, Western Chu would not even last for 3 months. Don't be fooled by the righteous sects' high-sounding words, like they were worried about the common people and were afraid that people would be plunged into misery and suffering. But once Eastern Qi attacked Western Chu, let's not talk about whether they would intervene. Even if they really wanted to intervene, would Eastern Qi listen to them? Would they stop their footsteps to unify the world? Even if Lu Haochang was fatuous, even if he was an idiot, would he stop if he was only half a step away from unifying the world and accomplishing the great feat that Eastern Qi's previous emperors had failed to achieve? At that time, other than surrendering, Western Chu would have no other way out. Never put your future in the hands of others. Meng Yuncheng was very clear about this point. After a long while, Meng Yuncheng let out a long sigh and said to Senior Qing and the others, "Everyone, I'm sorry. Western Chu does not want to intervene in the martial arts world's disputes, nor do we want to interfere in the feud between the orthodox and the evil. But Eastern Qi is Western Chu's archenemy. If the lips are gone, the teeth will be interdependent. I know this. So if Eastern Qi sends troops to Northern Yan, Western Chu will also send troops to Eastern Qi." Without waiting for Senior Qing and the others to continue, Meng Yuncheng said in a low voice, "Yuan Fu. Here." Yuan Fu immediately straightened his plump body and stepped in front of Meng Yuncheng at an extremely fast speed. From tomorrow onwards, Langjia army will immediately move to the border of Eastern Qi. At the same time, gather the Western Chu army and send troops to Eastern Qi. Hearing Meng Yuncheng's words, Senior Qing and the others all shook their heads. As the Western Chu emperor, Meng Yuncheng still had this bit of decisiveness. Once he decided on something, he would not change his mind. Moreover, they were all sects from Western Chu and usually had a good relationship with the Western Chu imperial court. Naturally, they knew Meng Yuncheng's difficulties. This time, Meng Yuncheng could not be blamed for choosing to stand on the side of the evil. He only chose to stand on the side of Northern Yan. If there was anything to blame, it could only be said that Eastern Qi was too strong. Anyone would feel threatened by it. So when they heard Meng Yuncheng's decision, they did not say anything harsh. They just cupped their hands and left. Of course, they still did not have a good attitude towards Chu Xiu, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the others. After Senior Qing and the others left, Meng Yuncheng turned to Chu Xiu and the others and said amiably, "This is official Chu's first time coming to Eastern Qi. We will order people to prepare a banquet to entertain you." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Many thanks for your Majesty's kindness, but Eastern Qi's army has already arrived. Perhaps they have already started fighting." Time is of the essence and we must go back to support them. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Meng Yunqing did not insist and let Chu Xiu and the others leave first. After everyone had left, Meng Yunqing suddenly slumped down on the dragon throne, looking extremely exhausted. "Your Majesty!" Yuan Fu hurried to greet him. Meng Yunqing shook his head and said, "We are fine. We just feel a little sad. The battle between the righteous and demonic factions, the struggle between Eastern Qi and Northern Yan, clearly has nothing to do with our West Chu, but every time it involves our West Chu soldiers and generals. Chu Xiu has a saying that has spread far and wide in the pugilistic world. In the pugilistic world, being weak is a sin in itself. This saying is also suitable for our West Chu. Being weak is a great sin. We do not ask for our West Chu to unify the world. We only ask for our West Chu to one day be recognized by everyone and not be reduced to a foil in every war. We don't even have the right to choose whether to fight or not." Seeing Meng Yunqing's emotional expression, Yuan Fu also sighed. He was an old man in the West Chu court. In his early years, he was a bandit in the pugilistic world. When he was seriously injured, he was rescued by the previous emperor. Since then, he had been loyal to the Meng family. He had watched Meng Yunqing grow up. He knew that the emperor's ability and wisdom were definitely not bad. He even felt that the emperor was not inferior to the current world's hero, Xiang Long. The only difference was that Xiang Long had the leeway to display his abilities, while Meng Yunqing did not even have the leeway to display his abilities. But this was also the sorrow of a small country. They had no choice but to go with the flow. It was just like what Chu Xiu had said. Being weak was a sin to begin with. Being able to survive was already something that one should thank the heavens and earth for. At this time, Chu Xiu did not know that Meng Yunqing was so emotional because of his words in the past. He did not have time to waste. He and Xiang Chong rushed back to Northern Yan as fast as possible. But before they reached Northern Yan, they saw the Northern Yan military waiting for them at the border. They told them that Eastern Qi had begun to attack. And this attack was from all directions. The border between Eastern Qi and Northern Yan, the Guanzhong torture room, and the Wei County were attacked at the same time. Among them, the Guanzhong torture room was about to collapse. Chapter 999. The Guanzhong torture room was located in the middle of the Three Kingdoms. In every war between the Three Kingdoms, the Guanzhong torture room had always been the unluckiest. But this time, the Guanzhong torture room had truly suffered an undeserved calamity. If not for Chu Xiu, Eastern Qi would not have attacked from the direction of the Guanzhong torture room. The two kingdoms had many other borders, including Wei County. But now, everyone knew that the nominal head of the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Yuansheng, was actually a puppet. The real ruler of the Guanzhong torture room was still Chu Xiu. So naturally, the Guanzhong torture room became one of the three major Eastern Qi attack sites. In less than 3 days, the Guanzhong torture room had fallen more than half, pushed to the gates of Guanzhong. At this time, tens of thousands of soldiers had surrounded the Guanzhong torture room. The east side of the city had the most soldiers, and in the center was a huge chariot. At this time, there was a middle-aged man in armor lying lazily on the chariot. He was holding a glass of wine and had a mustache. He didn't look like he was here to fight. Instead, he looked like he was here to watch a show. But this man was no ordinary person. He was General Nangong Weiyu of the Eastern Qi Imperial Guard. Among the 9 armies of the Eastern Qi, the Imperial Guard could be ranked in the top 3. The military system of the Eastern Qi was similar to that of the Northern Yan. The only difference was that the Northern Yan only had the 5 armies of the state, while the Eastern Qi had the 9 armies of the Northern Yan. Of course, because of the vastness of Eastern Qi's territory, the 9 armies were only stationed at the 9 important borders of Eastern Qi. Apart from wars of annihilation, it was not easy to gather all of them. Nangong Weiyu and Beigong Bailey were old rivals. Even their names were in direct opposition to each other, as if they were born to be rivals. Last time, when Eastern Qi attacked Yan and Chu, Nangong Weiyu had suffered some losses against Beigong Bailey. This time, he wanted to save some face, but he didn't expect the higher-ups to send him to attack the Guanzhong torture room. This made Nangong Weiyu a little unhappy. It was too easy. At this moment, there were two people standing beside Nangong. One of them was the Chunyang Dao sect's Mako Mori, and the other was the White Tiger Hall's master, Helian Changfeng. 3 true fire spirit refinement realm experts and the entire Imperial Guard were enough to take down a Guanzhong torture room. Mako Mori frowned. General Nangong, can we give the order to attack the city? You set up the formation, but you're drinking here. What is the meaning of this? Nangong Weiyu glanced at Mako Mori without saying a word. This made Mako Mori even angrier. General Nangong, what is the meaning of this? Nangong Weiyu put down his wine glass and snorted. Do you have a problem with me, Daoist? Of course I do. The Chunyang Dao sect sent me here to assist you, General, but you're stalling for time here. A thunderous strike can kill these demonic cultivators when they're caught off guard. If this drags on, what if something unexpected happens? Nangong Weiyu clapped his hands. Daoist, you're right. All right, you'll be the general. You'll be in command. You do it. As he said this, Nangong Weiyu actually stood up and was about to leave. Helian Changfeng, who was watching the show at the side, hurriedly pulled him back. Brother Nangong, Daoist Mako Mori doesn't mean that. Don't be angry. We people of the pugilistic world don't understand military formations. You can explain it to Daoist, and he'll understand, right? Mako Mori was also trembling with anger. He had never seen such a reckless person before. He was simply impervious to everything. However, for the sake of the Chunyang Dao sect's plan, he forcefully held it in and didn't say a word. Nangong Weiyu snorted coldly. Don't give orders blindly if you don't understand. I hate amateurs guiding experts the most. I'm not as good as you Daoists at chanting scriptures and drawing talismans, but am I not good at military formations? Do you know how many people have gathered in the entire Guanzhong city? Nearly 100,000 warriors of the Guanzhong torture room are among them. Previously, we didn't encounter any decent resistance in other places. That's because the Guanzhong torture room has already transferred the elites of the Guangdong, Guannan, Guanxi, and Guanbei regions to the Guanzhong city. That's nearly 100,000 warriors. They're all constables and constables who have seen blood on their hands. Although they aren't part of the military formations, they aren't weak either. I have the confidence to win, but what about after that? That's nearly 100,000 warriors, not 100,000 pigs. If they just charge in like this, how many losses will the Imperial Guard suffer? These people are my comrades. Even if you don't feel sorry for them, I will. Helian Changfeng smiled. I see. But Brother Nangong, why are you dragging it out like this? Do you have a plan? Nangong Weiyu squinted his eyes. Have you heard of eagle endurance? You haven't experienced the pressure of a great army. No matter how strong a person is, they won't be able to withstand that kind of pressure. If I attack directly, the other party might rely on their bravery and fight to the death, causing great losses to the Imperial Guard. But when I've exhausted their bravery and only fear is left, then it'll be much easier. An unsheathed blade isn't scary. A blade hidden in a sheath is the scariest. Hearing Nangong Weiyu's explanation, Helian Changfeng and Mako Mori finally understood what he meant. In fact, these warriors from the Jianghu really didn't think as much as Nangong Weiyu, who came from the military. In a battle to the death between sects, even if it's two large sects with more than 10,000 people, they would often swarm in together. It was a battle of overall strength, so there weren't many twists and turns. At this time, Mako Mori suddenly thought of something. He suddenly said, "Oh right, in the Guanzhong torture room, anyone can die, but it's best to leave Chu Yuansheng alive. He was bewitched by Chu Xiu because he had no choice. The Guanzhong torture room is not wrong. The one who is wrong is that devil, Chu Xiu. It had to be said that the reputation of the great hero Chu Kuanga was still very useful in the Jianghu. Even an old man like Mako Mori admired Chu Kuanga's deeds. Although there were many people in the Jianghu who were stronger than him, no one had the face to question Chu Kuanga's title. Chu Yuansheng was Chu Kuanga's only son. Even if he was standing on Chu Xiu's side and was their enemy, Mako Mori still wanted to keep him alive. Nangong Weiyu muttered and said impatiently, "Okay, got it." Mako Mori didn't hear what Nangong Weiyu muttered, but Helian Changfeng on the side heard it. What Nangong Weiyu said was clearly to be a whore and to build a chastity. At this time, in Guanzhong City, everyone was indeed in a panic as Nangong Weiyu expected. Chu Yuansheng sat on the main seat. He barely kept calm and said, "Haven't they attacked the city yet?" Guangdong penal officer Xiao Yi shook his head and said, "No, it seems that they are deliberately trying to exhaust us until we don't even have the last bit of courage to fight, then they will attack." When Chu Xiu was in the Guanzhong torture room, Xiao Yi was the strongest of the 4 penal officers. At this time, he had already stepped into the real pellet state. However, compared with the Imperial Guard outside, a real pellet state was nothing. Chu Yuansheng turned his head to another person and said, "Senior Chu, will there be reinforcements coming later?" It was Chu Wuji who was sitting next to Chu Yuansheng. Because Chu Wuji was also in the real fire spiritual refinement state, he had the strength to guard one side. When he heard that the Guanzhong torture room was surrounded, he also took the initiative to come. Wei Shuya went to Wei Jun to help. However, he was a martial artist who had just advanced to the real fire spiritual refinement state, but he had to face 3 existences who had already stepped into the real fire spiritual refinement state. Even if Chu Wuji never thought that he was weaker than anyone, he was not confident at this time. Chu Wuji shook his head and said, "I don't know. The news has already been sent out. Let's see who Yanjing City will send. Don't be afraid. Even if the Northern Yan Imperial Court doesn't send someone, Zhenwu Hall will send someone." Although Chu Wuji said so, in fact, he was not confident in his heart. The news had already been sent out, but there was no communication array between the Guanzhong torture room and the Northern Yan Imperial Court. They could only rely on manpower to send messages. So when the Northern Yan Imperial Court got the news and sent people over, he was not sure if they would make it in time. Chu Yuansheng nodded and said, "Well, even if we have to hold on, we have to hold on until the reinforcements come. The foundation of the Guanzhong torture room can't be destroyed like this." Everyone said that Chu Yuansheng was a tiger father and a dog son. Compared with Chu Kuanga, he really couldn't find anything special about him. It could even be said that he was extremely mediocre. But no matter how mediocre Chu Yuansheng was, he was not a good-for-nothing, nor was he a villain. This time, when Eastern Qi attacked the Guanzhong torture room, many people in the Guanzhong torture room were already complaining that it was because of Chu Xiu that the Guanzhong torture room was caught in the flames of war. In response to this kind of voice, Chu Yuansheng was the first to suppress it. Although Chu Xiu was the actual ruler of the Guanzhong torture room, he helped him to the position of hall master and did not take away any of the authority that he should have. The Guanzhong torture room was even stronger than before. Chu Xiu did not betray him, so naturally, he would not betray Chu Xiu. Chu Yuansheng could not do something like surrender for survival. And most importantly, the Guanzhong torture room was left behind by his father, Chu Kuanga. This might be the only obsession that Chu Yuansheng had in this life. His strength was weak and his ability was limited. He could not protect and strengthen the Guanzhong torture room, but others could. Therefore, he did not object to the fact that Chu Xiu was actually in control of the Guanzhong torture room. As long as the Guanzhong torture room was still there, and as long as the Guanzhong torture room was getting better, that was enough. But now, someone wanted to destroy the Guanzhong torture room. No matter how weak Chu Yuansheng was, he was ready to fight to the death with his enemies. His father was a great hero, and he died for the sake of justice. He, Chu Yuansheng, was not worth mentioning, but he was willing to fight to the death for the Guanzhong torture room. At this moment, there was a sudden battle cry from outside. Chu Wuji stood up and said in a low voice, "Eastern Qi, they're attacking the city. Hall Master Chu, you stay here and leave the rest to me." Chu Yuansheng shook his head and said, "I want to go out with you." Chapter 1000. Guanzhong had been through the fires of war and was located on all sides. Even if it was a city, it could easily be flattened if a war broke out. Therefore, after the Guanzhong torture room was built, they even spent a lot of money to build such a majestic steel city. It was indeed not easy to break through. Seeing that his soldiers could only climb up using ladders, Nangong Weiyu took out a crimson halberd with a scorching aura. Holding the halberd, Nangong Weiyu headed straight for the city gates. He pointed the halberd at the sky. In an instant, the wind and clouds howled in the air, burning red like fire. With a loud bang, the halberd fell, and a powerful wave of heat rushed straight for the city gates. Even the steel city could not withstand the killing blow of a true fire cultivator in the spirit ascension realm. But at this moment, a strange weapon that looked like a saber but not a saber and shaped like a crescent moon slashed down with a dazzling blood-red moonlight. Its earth energy seemed to cut through the heavens and earth. With a loud bang, it blocked Nangong Weiyu's halberd. Chu Wuji stood on top of the city gates and sneered, "It's General Nangong's turn so soon. Don't you think it's too degrading?" Nangong Weiyu said lightly, "Chu Wuji, it's you. No matter what, you used to be part of the royal family of the Wei Kingdom. You should be on the side of Eastern Qi. Why are you on the side of the Northern Yan?" Chu Wuji said coldly, "Back then, my Wei Kingdom was on the side of Eastern Qi. So what? A country that deserves to be destroyed will still be destroyed. Moreover, Xianglong is dead, and so are those who participated in the war to destroy my Wei Kingdom. I'm not on the side of the Northern Yan now, I'm on the side of the diabolism." Although the Wei Kingdom was destroyed by the Northern Yan, in fact, Chu Wuji did not have a good impression of Eastern Qi. The Wei Kingdom was a small country and could only survive in the cracks. However, back then, Wei Kingdom chose to side with Eastern Qi, but what happened in the end? The Wei Kingdom was destroyed, but Eastern Qi did not send reinforcements. Instead, they retreated. Later on, Lu Haochang became even more terrified. He didn't want to fight anymore, so he let this matter go. The only sacrifice was Wei Kingdom. Under such circumstances, it would be strange if Chu Wuji had a good impression of Eastern Qi. "General Nangong, why are you wasting your breath on this evil scoundrel? Just attack him." Mako Mori had already walked out of the formation and stood beside Nangong Weiyu, as did Helian Changfeng. The three of them stood together and formed a joint attack. At this moment, Chu Wuji's heart sank. Eastern Qi teamed up with the righteous martial arts world. This was indeed a force to be reckoned with. Even in a place like the Guanzhong torture room, they had already thrown 3 true fire spirit ascension realm cultivators. One could imagine how much pressure the other places were under. Facing this kind of attack, Chu Wuji snorted coldly, but he didn't retreat. The divine weapon in his hand danced in the air, and blood-colored moonlight sprinkled out. He actually fought 1 against 3, and directly slashed towards the 3 of them. Nangong Weiyu sneered. Miaoyue Dharma Supreme, Chu Wuji had quite a reputation in the diabolism. It should be said that before Chu Xiu appeared, Chu Wuji was the strongest among the new generation of the diabolism. However, who here was mediocre? The general of Eastern Qi, the chief hall leader of White Tiger Hall, and the perfected masters of the previous generation of Chunyang Dao sect, none of them were mediocre. Helian Changfeng slashed down with the saber in his hand. The White Tiger deity shield, which was filled with murderous intent, tore through the void. Mako Mori formed a Daoist seal with his hand. Pure yang qi destroyed all evil and demons, and its power was boundless. Finally, Nangong Weiyu's halberd swept down as if it was splitting a mountain. The three of them joined forces, and Chu Wuji was sent flying. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. In less than 3 moves, Chu Wuji was already heavily injured. Even the divine weapon in his hand, the divine weapon, let out a mournful wail. Nangong Weiyu shook his head. Fight till the end? Your courage is commendable, but it's still useless. As Nangong Weiyu's voice fell, the flames on the halberd in his hand floated, and the scorching stellar energy dyed half the sky red. The halberd smashed down, and the fire dragon roared out. Just as Chu Wuji was about to burn his blood essence and fight again, and if he really could not do it, he would retreat with Chu Yuansheng and the others. A whistling sound suddenly rang out. Wherever the pitch-black arrow passed, even the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was extinguished. With a loud explosion, the arrow landed on the majestic fire dragon. In an instant, the scarlet flames on the fire dragon began to extinguish, and were replaced by the black flames of apocalyptic destruction. The flames of apocalyptic destruction even extended along the fire dragon to Nangong Weiyu's halberd. His expression suddenly changed, and the raging stellar energy around him suddenly erupted, completely expelling the power. Triple City Destroying Arrow. Chu Wuji immediately sighed in relief, but Nangong Weiyu and the others' expressions changed, and their hearts tightened. Chu Xiu, why was he here? He had come from Yanjing City, and he was so fast. In the air, Chu Xiu's body flashed with monstrous demon energy. He descended step by step, and looked at Nangong Weiyu. He said coldly, Are you worthy of using halberd? Everyone in Guangzhong City heaved a sigh of relief when they saw Chu Xiu. While there had been people silently criticizing Chu Xiu for bringing all of Guangzhong into the flames of war and so on. But now that Chu Xiu had appeared, they knew that the entire Guangzhong torture room only had one pillar, and that was Chu Xiu. Nangong Weiyu was about to say something with a dark face, when Chu Xiu pointed at him and said, Retreat. What a joke. Nangong Weiyu sneered and said, Chu Xiu, do you really think you're invincible? My Imperial Guard has tens of thousands of elites. Do you think you can handle them all by yourself? Chu Xiu turned to Chu Wuji and said, Lead all the members of Guangzhong torture room out of the city and fight to the death. I'll handle these 3. Chu Wuji nodded and immediately ran back into the city. This time, Chu Xiu came to Guangzhong torture room alone, while Xiang Chong directly returned to Yanjing City. He alone was enough to save the Guangzhong torture room. Xiang Chong still had to manage the 9-dragon seal and could not leave Yanjing City for too long. On the other side, when Nangong Weiyu and the other 2 saw Chu Xiu's attitude of ignoring them, their faces darkened at the same time. Although the 3 of them admitted that Chu Xiu was indeed powerful, and even in the primitive Devil's Cave, he could even force Su Ci from the Great Light Temple to retreat with one all-out attack. However, the 3 of them weren't nobodies. Chu Xiu, did you really think that you could defeat them? But before the 3 of them could make a move, Chu Xiu had already made the first move. The evil moon saber was already in his hand, and the power of the heart demon began to suppress the weapon spirit of the evil moon saber. There was only 15 minutes, but to deal with the 3 of them, not to mention 15 minutes, half an hour was enough. The long saber slashed down, and a blood-colored crescent moon appeared in midair. This blood-colored crescent moon was very similar to the scene when Chu Wuji used the divine weapon, Wonderful Moon. However, in Chu Xiu's saber, there was endless evil power. Even the space was distorted, and the surrounding power was swallowed. The saber headed straight for Nangong Weiyu. Feeling the power in the saber, Nangong Weiyu's expression changed. The halberd in his hand danced wildly, and the roar of a flaming dragon surrounded him like a shield of fire. The corners of Chu Xiu's mouth curled up into a mocking smile. The ancient halberd is a ferocious weapon used in battle. What's more important is its aura. The halberd can only be used to attack, not to defend. Halberd is really a disgrace in your hands. As the general of Eastern Qi, Nangong Weiyu's Imperial Guard strength was enough to rank in the top 3 of the 9 border armies. But his use of halberd was really not as good as that of Lu Fengxian. Although Lu Fengxian had not yet reached the true fire spirit refining realm, when Lu Fengxian reached the true fire spirit refining realm, she would be able to beat her opponent. The evil moon saber slashed down, and the evil power continued to devour the power of the flaming dragon, strengthening itself. The saber and the halberd collided, and the dazzling blood-colored blade directly tore the flaming dragon apart. Nangong Weiyu suddenly felt an extremely strong force attack him, and his whole body was blasted away. As a martial artist with a military background, and using a fierce weapon like the halberd, Nangong Weiyu had naturally cultivated a body-tempering technique. However, no matter how strong Nangong Weiyu's body was, he was not as strong as Chu Xiu, who had already cultivated the true fire spirit refining realm. At this time, Mako Mori and Helian Changfeng's attacks had already reached Chu Xiu. The Dao sword in Mako Mori's hand blossomed with pure sunlight, and it was as dazzling as the sun. He had cultivated the pure yang astral qi for his entire life, and his power was already extremely pure. Under the pure yang astral qi, no other power could be tolerated. The saber in Helian Changfeng's hand was like it could split the mountains and split the seas. The extreme sharpness even tore apart the heaven and earth essence energy. The Western White Tiger's Eugene sharpness was unleashed to the extreme. As the saber shadow descended, there was even a white tiger's blood shadow lingering within the white tiger baleful god's shield. In that instant, Chu Xiu's hands formed a seal. Majestic demonic qi and scorching Buddhist light were released simultaneously, and an evil Dharma idol appeared behind him. On one side was the Vairocana seal. The Dharma idol was solemn and dignified, and the Buddhist light was resplendent. On the other side was the demonic god Mahakala. He was ferocious and furious, and his demonic flames surged to the skies. This Dharma idol had 2 faces and 4 arms. The Vairocana seal formed by the colorless sealing palm was like a mustard seed, and the heavens and earth were all enveloped within it. In an instant, it had already shattered Helian Changfeng's white tiger baleful god shield, and shattered the white tiger Dharma idol with a single slap. The demonic god of the great Mahakala put his palms together, and from the 3 eyes on the top of his head, endless apocalyptic flames came roaring down. Its might was earth-shattering, and it directly enveloped Mako Mori in his apocalyptic flames, devouring the pure yang energy around him. He was forced to use all his strength to use the Dao sword in his hand to slash apart the apocalyptic flames, and only then was he able to escape. In just 2 moves, all 3 of them were forced to retreat. In an instant, Chu Xiu's might was immeasurable. And at this time, the gates of Guangzhong city also opened. Under the lead of Chu Wuji, Shao Yi, and the others, a group of Guangzhong torture room martial artists immediately rushed towards the Imperial Guard outside. In an instant, the sounds of killing filled the heavens and earth, and killing intent surged to the heavens. Chapter 1001. The number of martial artists in the Guangzhong torture room wasn't considered small, but as compared to the Imperial Guard, they were lacking in coordination. In one-on-one battles, or when a small number of people fought, the Guangzhong torture room's martial artists would definitely have the upper hand. Although the Guangzhong torture room's martial artists had the upper hand in terms of numbers and injuries, they were still at a disadvantage when it came to actual combat. However, in this battlefield, other than the Guangzhong torture room's martial artists being at a disadvantage at the beginning, the Guangzhong torture room was suppressing their opponents. The reason was simple: Nangong Weiyu was also being suppressed by Chu Xiu. As a general, Nangong Weiyu was almost equivalent to the soul of the Imperial Guard. In the end, Nangong Weiyu was defeated at the front line, and this was a huge blow to the morale of the entire Imperial Guard. Nangong Weiyu also saw the scene below. He turned to Helian Changfeng and Mako Mori and shouted, "Let's attack together. Don't let Chu Xiu get the chance." Based on Chu Xiu's current strength, they might not be a match for Chu Xiu one-on-one, but they didn't believe that they couldn't defeat Chu Xiu if the three of them attacked together. Fire patterns appeared around Nangong Weiyu's body, and a majestic aura poured into the halberd in his hand. The long halberd slashed down, and the roar of the fire dragon resounded throughout the sky. Mako Mori bit his thumb and drew a pure Yang Dao pattern in the void with his burning blood. When his sword slashed on the pure Yang Dao pattern, countless pure Yang runes flourished and shrouded towards Chu Xiu. Helian Chongfeng didn't make a move, but the surging killing intent around him had already evolved into a materialized white tiger fiend divine constellation, which condensed on the battle saber in his hand. A piercingly cold and sharp intent surged up, but it was not released. He was waiting for the most suitable moment for him to strike. In the face of the three's all-out attacks, Chu Xiu formed a seal with his hands. In an instant, a turbulent demonic aura rose from his feet, and even his eyes were completely dyed black. Murmurs that seemed to come from the sticks of hell resounded throughout the world. As Chu Xiu displayed his hand seals, the sky wept and blood rained down. The pure Yang runes that wrapped around Chu Xiu burst and melted under the dense rain of blood, and couldn't even last for a breath of time. Moreover, within the blood rain, the boundless blood color actually condensed into a huge fiend celestial phantom that was 10,000 feet tall. With a grab, it directly crushed the fire dragon that Nangong Weiyu had conjured with his power as if it were an earthworm. In that instant, the sky wept and blood rain stopped. Mako Mori and Nangong Weiyu both spat out a mouthful of blood. After Chu Xiu's Heaven and Earth Demon Weeping Mantra gained new insights in Primitive Demon Cave, its power could be said to have risen to a whole new level. Although it couldn't replicate the power of Primitive Demon Cave, it wasn't much weaker. But at this moment, the moment that the sky wept and blood rain disappeared, a cool breeze suddenly blew past. In the next moment, Helian Chongfeng's saber-wielding figure had already appeared in front of Chu Xiu. No one saw how he had attacked, not even Chu Xiu. Clouds follow dragons, wind follows tigers. Helian Chongfeng's saber was filled with killing intent, but it borrowed the power of the wind to pass through layers of space. By the time the saber fell, it had already touched Chu Xiu's protective astral energy. The killing intent frantically tore through the astral energy, and the saber intent was even about to corrode Chu Xiu's body. This was Helian Chongfeng's essence, qi, and spirit had reached its peak. Taking advantage of the fact that Nangong Weiyu and Mako Mori had already offset Chu Xiu's killer move, he slashed out at the critical point where Chu Xiu's strength was connected. He was confident that no one in the same realm could dodge his saber. But at this moment, Chu Xiu's evil moon saber seemed to have a mind of its own. It suddenly appeared in front of the two, and the twisted blood-colored moonlight swallowed everything in an instant. The heart demon shouted in Chu Xiu's mind, "Only 3 breaths of time left. I've forcefully used the evil moon saber to protect its master, and I've used up too much energy. I can no longer suppress the weapon spirit. 3 breaths of time is enough." The moment Chu Xiu clenched the evil moon saber, the saber intent of the break formula slashed out. Although this slash was hurriedly executed and not Chu Xiu's full strength, the invincible saber intent of the break formula directly destroyed all of Helian Chongfeng's attacks. The white tiger baleful god shield was torn apart. Helian Chongfeng watched as the saber in his hand was shattered like tofu by the demonic long saber in Chu Xiu's hand. That was the white tiger hall's divine weapon that had been passed down for generations, the death god. Of course, at this moment, Helian Chongfeng couldn't care less about the saber in his hand. The moment the saber intent of the break formula appeared, the invincible energy charged straight at Helian Chongfeng. Just shattering a saber wasn't the limit of the break formula's saber intent. This slash could cut the heavens, shatter the earth, and destroy all things in the world. There was nothing it couldn't break. Explosions of energy rang out. The seemingly solid white tiger baleful god shield was as fragile as tofu in front of this slash. Helian Chongfeng's figure retreated quickly, but cracks had already appeared on his battle armor. The saber intent was about to enter his body. With a roar, the blood energy around Helian Changfeng ignited. A hazy bloody mist condensed into a white tiger Dharma idol behind Helian Changfeng. As it roared angrily at the sky, it received the power of the white tiger star god. Even though the sky was clear and boundless, Helian Changfeng still forcibly guided a streak of starlight down and attached it to the white tiger behind him. As the white tiger roared, a force that contained the power of the stars and boundless blood chi gushed out from its mouth. However, it was still torn apart by the saber intent of the break formula. However, it finally offset the power of Chu Xiu's slash. Helian Changfeng's eyes flickered with fear. He no longer had any intention of fighting Chu Xiu. With a pale face, he turned around and fled. At that moment, he really felt that death was about to befall him. Perhaps if he had used just a little more strength, he would have been completely cut into pieces by Chu Xiu's slash. At this time, Chu Xiu did not stop. He gathered devil chi in his hand and shot out 3 Annihilation City arrows. Moreover, it was not just one arrow, but 3 consecutive arrows. The 3 arrows went straight for Mako Mori. When they arrived in front of him, they exploded. The power of Nirvana eroded Mako Mori's pure yang aura chi. The endless annihilation fire had completely enveloped the old Daoist. After the 3 arrows, Chu Xiu did not even look at them. He went straight for Nangong Weiyu. The power of the heart demon could no longer suppress the evil moon saber. Chu Xiu simply did not use the evil moon saber. Instead, he punched at Nangong Weiyu. With Chu Xiu's current physical strength, it was enough to take on a divine weapon. Nangong Weiyu was forced to retreat step by step by Chu Xiu. He roared angrily, and a layer of purple flames ignited in his eyes. On the halberd, the purple flames erupted. A tiny spark contained a powerful explosive force. However, in the next moment, Chu Xiu's body was filled with Buddhist light. The Mahavirokana Dharma idol appeared behind him. The colorless ceiling palm imprint fell again, distorting the space between heaven and earth. In an instant, the power of Chu Xiu's attack was completely dissipated. Nangong Weiyu was about to go crazy. It was this move again. Only God knew that he, Chu Xiu, was a ferocious and powerful devil. Why would he know such a fierce and imposing Buddhist martial art? However, what Nangong Weiyu did not expect was that Chu Xiu's colorless ceiling palm imprint was even stronger than the one he had used against Helian Changfeng. At that time, Chu Xiu had attacked both Helian Changfeng and Mako Mori at the same time. But now, he was only attacking Nangong Weiyu. Under the twisting strangulation of the endless Buddhist light, the divine weapon halberd in Nangong Weiyu's hand actually shattered. Before Nangong Weiyu had time to feel distressed, Chu Xiu took a step forward and was already in front of him. His fist, which was shining with the flames of destruction, blasted down. It was mixed with the fist intent of the mountain and sea fist scripture. It could shatter mountains and split seas. On Nangong Weiyu's arm, the crimson gang chi turned into a roaring fire dragon and met Chu Xiu's fist. But in the next moment, the fire dragon had already been swallowed by the flames of destruction. The armor on his body could not even withstand the power of Chu Xiu's fist and was shattered. His whole body was also blasted away, vomiting blood. At this moment, the soldiers of the Imperial Guard below saw that their general was actually vomiting blood by Chu Xiu. This was definitely a huge blow to their morale, and there were even deserters. If it were not for the strict military discipline of the Imperial Guard, they would have already begun to collapse. Cover the middle army, retreat. Nangong Weiyu covered his chest and shouted angrily. Helian Changfeng had already escaped, and Mako Mori's fate was unknown. He no longer had the intention to continue fighting. Chu Xiu did not chase after Nangong Weiyu, but turned to look at Mako Mori, who was surrounded by the flames of destruction. In the next moment, a scorching pure yang light rushed out from the flames of destruction, turned into a sword light, and fled. It was Mako Mori's figure, but no one knew how much he had paid for it. The three of them fled in three different directions. Chu Xiu did not chase after them, and he also breathed a sigh of relief. Using the Devil's Whale Great Compassion mantra and the sword intent of the breaking word formula consecutively, and fighting 1 against 3 in a short period of time, took a lot out of Chu Xiu. It was meaningless to forcibly chase after them. At most, he could only leave one of them alive, and there was still a mess at the Guanzhong torture room to deal with. At this time, the Guanzhong torture room had won completely. With Chu Xiu fighting the 3 true fire spirit refinement realm existences, although Chu Wuji was injured, he still had combat strength. In addition, the Guanzhong torture room had a large number of people. Even if it was a chaotic battle without any formation, the effect was not bad. Chu Wuji walked over with a slightly pale face. He looked at Chu Xiu with a look of surprise. Previously in the primitive devil cave, Chu Xiu had forced Su Ci to retreat with his saber. But at that time, there was too little time, and he could not observe Chu Xiu's true strength. Now, Chu Xiu was fighting 1 against 3, and all 3 of them were seriously injured. This was a little terrifying. If these 3 people were at the level of the Sun family ancestor or the Lu family ancestor, it would not be a big deal. But these 3 people were not easy to deal with. Their combat strength stood at the peak of the same realm, but they were still crushed by Chu Xiu. This was a little terrifying. Chapter 1002. The battle between the Guanzhong torture room and the Imperial Guard was also a great loss. Looking at Chu Wuji's complexion, he had also suffered some injuries. Chu Xiu handed over a bottle of elixir and asked, "How serious is the injury? Where is Elder Wei?" Chu Wuji took the elixir and shook his head. "It's not too serious. Elder Wei should have gone to Wei County, which is also the main point of Eastern Qi's attack. But 3 of the 5 armies of Eastern Qi and the Masters of the Imperial Worship Hall are already there, so it should be much easier." After saying that, Chu Wuji sighed and said, "Your current strength is probably infinitely close to the mysterious realm of heaven and earth, isn't it? The combination of true fire-tempering spirit and true fire-tempering body is really terrifying. I even want to give it a try." Of course, Chu Wuji was just saying it. He would be crazy to try such a thing. The true fire-tempering body could not be practiced without great perseverance. The success of Chu Xiu's cultivation was largely due to luck. If others were like him, being blasted into pieces and still not dying, it was possible for them to cultivate the true fire-tempering body after their body was reconstructed. The mysterious realm of heaven and earth is not so easy to deal with. At our level, each step is a different heaven. The difference between clouds and mud is not so easy to surpass. Chu Wuji said, "But in my opinion, you have at least crossed the half-heaven." After a few words of greeting, Chu Wuji directly followed Chu Xiu into Guanzhong City. Xiao Yi and the others were counting the losses of the Guanzhong torture room. When they saw Chu Xiu, they all bowed respectfully. Chu Yuansheng also saw Chu Xiu. He looked a little embarrassed because he did not know how to address Chu Xiu. Although he already knew that Chu Xiu was using him, Chu Yuansheng did not really hate Chu Xiu. After all, his interests had not been harmed, and even his father's position had returned to him. The power of the Guanzhong torture room was also greater than before. Back then, he was Chu Xiu's big brother. But now, Chu Xiu was no longer the Jianghu arrester of the Guanzhong torture room. He was a giant of the diabolism, an ambitious and ruthless figure who controlled the entire northern Yan martial world. It could even be said that his father was not as strong as Chu Xiu at his peak. Back when Chu Kuanga had fought against Divine Lord Luo of Tianmen, he had only managed to seriously injure Divine Lord Luo by sacrificing his own life. But now, Chu Xiu could already kill an Elysium Divine General. This was the difference between them. Before Chu Yuansheng could say anything, Chu Xiu walked over first, cupped his hands, and said, "Big brother, how have you been?" This time, I came late. If I had come earlier, maybe the cities of the Guanzhong torture room would not have been lost. Seeing that Chu Xiu's attitude towards him was almost the same as before, Chu Yuansheng also breathed a sigh of relief, and even looked a little touched. Brother Chu, you don't have to blame yourself. You came at the right time. In fact, the Guanzhong torture room did not lose anything. Previously, we knew that with the strength of the Guanzhong torture room, it was basically a mantis trying to stop a chariot when faced with the army of Eastern Qi. So when the army of Eastern Qi first arrived, we had already withdrawn our men. The cities that Eastern Qi occupied were just empty cities. Moreover, the Eastern Qi also wanted to completely occupy Guanzhong, so they did not make things difficult for some of the martial arts forces or other people in the cities. Chu Xiu nodded and said, "That's good. After we finish counting the casualties, let's go to the meeting. The retreat of the Imperial Guards does not mean that we are safe. Eastern Qi does not only have one Imperial Guard." An hour later, all the higher-ups of the Guanzhong torture room and Chu Wuji came to the meeting hall. Chu Yuansheng wanted Chu Xiu to sit in the main seat, but Chu Xiu refused. With his current status, he no longer needed to sit in the main seat to win status and respect. In fact, with Chu Xiu's current strength, the Guanzhong torture room was dispensable to him. Chu Yuansheng did not betray him in the past, so naturally, he would not betray Chu Yuansheng. So as long as he was alive, the Guanzhong torture room would always have the surname Chu. Secretly, the surname was Chu Xiu, and publicly, the surname was Chu Yuansheng. Moreover, Chu Xiu also admired Chu Kuanga, Chu Juxia. But admiration was just admiration. Chu Xiu would be Chu Kuanga for the rest of his life. "How are the casualties in the Guanzhong torture room?" Chu Xiu asked. Xiao Yi said in a deep voice, "More than 3,000 people died, and 10,000 were injured. In such a battle, the Guanzhong torture room does not have the upper hand." After that, Xiao Yi looked up at Chu Xiu carefully and said, "My lord, can the Northern Yan send reinforcements over?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "It's very difficult. The Northern Yan's strength is obvious, and the 5 armies of the state have already been sent out. If we were to transfer more troops, we would have to transfer the royal guard stationed around the Yanjing city to protect the palace." The expressions of the martial artists in the Guanzhong torture room changed. Without reinforcements, how could they defend the Guanzhong torture room? Don't think that the Guanzhong torture room was strong before, but this was a war between nations. A powerful army built with the strength of a nation was not something that the Guanzhong torture room could withstand. However, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "We can't get reinforcements from the Northern Yan, but we can think of a way to change the target for the Eastern Qi in Northern Yan. The Guanzhong torture room is not the main place. Wei County has Jiangshan Pavilion as the front line, and the border between the Northern Yan and Eastern Qi is also a place that both sides will fight for. The Guanzhong torture room is actually dispensable to the Eastern Qi." Xiao Yi smiled bitterly and said, "But the problem now is, how can we make the Eastern Qi change their mind?" Chu Xiu thought about it and knocked on the table, saying, "The Guanzhong torture room has been the center of trade between the 3 nations for so many years. You torture officers must have been involved in smuggling, right?" The expressions of Xiao Yi and the others changed slightly. Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, "Don't be nervous. Back when I was a torture officer in the Guanzhong torture room, I also did this kind of thing. Every man for himself will be destroyed by heaven and earth. Who can avoid such a lucrative business? All of you have been in the Guanzhong torture room longer than me. For so many years, have there been any Eastern Qi bigwigs, royalty, and the like who interfered in the smuggling business? Can you contact them?" Xiao Yi nodded and said, "Yes, we can contact them. But Lord, this is the time of war between the Eastern Qi and the Northern Yan. Even if we can contact them, they won't dare to interfere." Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't worry, you just need to contact them. As long as the benefits are enough, it's not like they won't betray their country. You just need to contact them according to what I said. I won't show myself since my identity is sensitive. But I will tell you what to say in secret. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, although Xiao Yi was still puzzled, he could only nod and agree. After so many years in the Guanzhong torture room, Xiao Yi and the others had accumulated a lot of connections. If the people in the eastern Qi wanted to smuggle things to the northern Yan and west Chu, they would have to sneak in with small caravans. Big caravans would have to get through to the inspectors. And for some extremely sensitive things, they had to get through to the torture officers. So Xiao Yi and the others knew quite a few of the powerful people in the eastern Qi imperial court. But at this critical moment, these people didn't want to see Xiao Yi. But Chu Xiu's method was very rough. He directly threatened them that if they didn't come, he would hand over the evidence of their smuggling to the eastern Qi imperial court, especially the contraband they had smuggled to the northern Yan. So although this group of people was angry, they still came obediently. Of course, they weren't stupid enough to enter the territory of the Guanzhong torture room. Instead, they found a place where the eastern Qi and the Guanzhong torture room intersected to meet with Xiao Yi. In an inn in a small town, Xiao Yi had booked the entire inn. Sitting across from him were several people dressed in luxurious clothes. There were old and young people, but all of them had angry expressions on their faces. One of them said coldly, "Lord Xiao, this is not what you did. We have worked together so many times before. Even if we can't do business, we can still be friends. You followed Chu Xiu and the Northern Yan, but now that you are being pressured by the army, you implicated us. What is the meaning of this?" Xiao Yi knew the identity of the people in front of him. They were all nobles in the eastern Qi, and some were even royalty. For example, the person in front of him was Lu Changlong, Duke Huai of the eastern Qi. He belonged to the collateral royal family. Although he was conferred the title of duke, he didn't have any real power. So he spent most of his time making money and enjoying himself. Xiao Yi waved his hand and said, "Everyone, please calm down. None of you want to see me. I have no other choice. That's why I came up with this trick. Now, everyone should know the predicament of the Guanzhong torture room. This time, I am here to ask for your help." Lu Changlong and the others shook their heads quickly and said, "Don't, Lord Xiao. You know our background. How can we have a say in such a big matter?" Xiao Yi laughed and said, "Everyone here is a famous person in the eastern Qi imperial court. Why can't you have a say in this? Don't worry. Since we are asking for help, the Guanzhong torture room will naturally show our sincerity. When the Guanzhong torture room calms down, I won't take a single cent from the things you want to smuggle in the future. And as long as you agree to help the Guanzhong torture room once, everything here will belong to you." As he spoke, Xiao Yi opened a secret space box. Inside was a mountain of gold, silver, and jewelry. Although these things weren't very useful to martial artists, they were still real money. Chu Xiu wanted to bribe them with these things, which made Xiao Yi's heart ache. Seeing these things, Lu Changlong and the others were tempted. But they still shook their heads and said, "Although money is good, the Guanzhong torture room is on the side of the Northern Yan. Helping you is equivalent to selling out the country. The money from selling out the country isn't easy to earn." At this moment, Xiao Yi heard Chu Xiu's voice. He was stunned for a moment, then he asked with a smile, "Let me ask you a question. Do you think that the Northern Yan can swallow up the Eastern Qi?" Everyone at the scene immediately burst into laughter. LV Changlong disdainfully said, "Our great Qi sits on the rich and populous land of the Central Plains. There are many heroes and heroes. Even if His Majesty makes a few consecutive mistakes, those barbarians of Northern Yan will not be able to swallow up great Qi." Xiao Yi smiled and said, "If that's the case, then why are you worried about selling out the country? Not to mention that the Guanzhong torture room is only doing this for self-preservation. Even if we really want you to sell out the country, Eastern Qi won't have any problems, right? If that's the case, what's the big deal about selling out once in a while?" Chapter 1003. Chu Xiu had always believed that there were people in this world who could stick to their principles, but more of them were those who were willing to betray their own lives for the sake of profit. These people even cared about their own lives, not to mention betraying their country. If there was enough profit, what was the big deal about betraying their country once in a while? The words that Chu Xiu had asked Xiao Yi to say could be said to be aimed at the hearts of everyone present. After all, it was just a small favor. Moreover, with their influence, they could not affect the real strategy of Eastern Qi. Even if the Northern Yan really won this time, with the strength of Northern Yan, they would not be able to annex Eastern Qi. In that case, what were they afraid of? Lu Changlong was the first to laugh. We are old friends with Lord Shao. If the Guanzhong torture room falls, it will affect our business in the future, won't it? I will do my part in this matter. With Lu Changlong taking the lead, the others also spoke up and accepted the gifts from the Guanzhong torture room with peace of mind. The nobles of Eastern Qi, such as Lu Changlong, were either useless royals with no real power or talent in martial arts, or some useless nobles who had made great contributions during the founding of the country but could only sit around and wait for death. They might not be of much use when dealing with official business, but they were very good at this kind of betrayal. Therefore, after returning to Eastern Qi, they discussed among themselves and took turns to offer Lu Haochang many good things. What did Lu Haochang like? It was nothing more than women and some rare playthings. Some offered stunning beauties that they had carefully cultivated, and some offered divine birds that they had caught from the 100,000 mountains. They looked like owls with green feathers and red beaks. They were docile and eloquent. Lu Haochang did not refuse any of these gifts. He accepted them and comforted Nangong Weiyu, who had lost the battle, and asked him to rest. He simply forgot about the Guanzhong torture room. In fact, Lu Haochang was not an idiot. He had been an emperor for so many years. Although he was mediocre, he was not muddle-headed. These guys suddenly offered him so many beauties and treasures. If they did not have any ulterior motives, Lu Haochang would never believe it. Therefore, he had secretly investigated and found out that these guys had a smuggling business in the Guanzhong torture room. That was why they were worried that the Guanzhong torture room would be destroyed. But after knowing this, Lu Haochang did not expose them, nor did he punish them. Instead, he pretended not to know and happily accepted their gifts, satisfying their requests. If the water was too clear, there would be no fish. As long as the Eastern Qi was safe, why should he care so much? Moreover, if he really cut off their business, they would all be so poor. How could they offer him so many beauties and treasures the next time there was a problem? Lu Haochang's seemingly stupid approach saved the Guanzhong torture room. The troops that the Eastern Qi had stationed around the Guanzhong torture room were all withdrawn. This allowed the Guanzhong torture room to finally heave a sigh of relief. Although the Guanzhong torture room was fine, Chu Xiu was not in a hurry to return to the Northern Yan country. The victory or defeat of one place could not determine the direction of the whole war. In fact, Chu Xiu was also having a headache now. Things had developed to the stage of the national war. It was no longer something that could be solved by killing one or two people. Even if Chu Xiu was given a chance to kill Ling Yunzi, the supreme expert of the metaphysic realm of heaven and earth, it would be useless. Most of the orthodox sects in the Eastern Qi country had taken action. Some of them really wanted to eliminate the evil and defend the Tao, while some were doing it for the interests of all parties. And there was also the Eastern Qi imperial court. Once they started, not to mention the death of Ling Yunzi, even if the whole Chunyang Dao sect was destroyed, the Eastern Qi imperial court would not stop. The national war was not a child's play. Chu Xiu could not sit back and watch the Northern Yan country perish, nor could he watch his own interests suffer. So now, he really had to think of a way to break out of this situation. After staying in the Guanzhong torture room for 2 days, Chu Xiu pondered a lot. He looked around, but there was really no power that he could borrow. In fact, Chu Xiu still had some connections in the Jianghu. For example, he was on good terms with Xie Xiaolu. He could totally pay some price to ask for help from Qinqingdi's Heaven Alliance. But unfortunately, the Heaven Alliance could not affect the situation of the war. If Qinqingdi was a metaphysic realm expert, it would be better. As for the Eastern Qi country, he could also ask the Mo family to help, but the strength of the Mo family of Shenyang was basically dispensable. So after thinking for a long time, since he could not find help from the Central Plains warriors, why not look a little further, such as overseas? He thought of overseas because of the Jiangshan Pavilion. Since ancient times, although the overseas martial arts world and the Central Plains warriors were connected, there was little communication between the two sides. The strength of the overseas martial arts world might not be as strong as the Central Plains warriors, but it was definitely not weak. The overseas martial arts world was able to cultivate people like Kang Dongming. There was also the Jiangshan Pavilion, which had been hunted down like a stray dog. It was also because of the resources of the overseas martial arts world that they could rise again. There was also Zhong Shenxiu. Strictly speaking, he was also an overseas martial artist. Everyone knew the name of the East Sea Unrestrained Sky. Although they did not know whether the so-called East Sea Unrestrained Sky was an island or something else, since the word East Sea was added, it was definitely overseas. With such a strong force by his side, why not borrow it? Although Chu Xiu did not know the situation of the overseas martial arts world, there were people who did, such as the Sixth Demon Sect. Although the Sixth Demon Sect was far away in the South Sea and the East Sea were both seas. Chu Xiu believed that there must be some understanding between them. Moreover, the reason why Chu Xiu went to the Sixth Demon Sect was to test whether or not the Sixth Demon Sect would intervene in this matter. This matter had already evolved into a war between the righteous and demonic sects. It had even reached the point where the three countries were fighting each other. The disturbance was already quite big. The bright demons and the hidden demons had already made their move, but the Sixth Demon Sect, a neutral existence, was still missing. After instructing Chu Yuansheng and the others to act as usual, but to be careful, Chu Xiu went all the way to the Sixth Demon Sect in the South Sea. The Sixth Demon Sect was only close to the South Sea, but it was actually on a strange island next to the South Sea coast. It was strange because the island was surrounded by a formation. Even if an ordinary person wanted to find it, they would not be able to. Of course, Chu Xiu was not an ordinary person. He wanted to meet the people of the Sixth Demon Sect, so he directly released his aura in the sea. An hour later, Bushuan immediately came out with some people to personally welcome him. Your esteemed sect is truly fortunate to have Master Chu here. Come, come, come. Let's enter the sect and welcome Master Chu before we talk about anything else. Bushuan's attitude was very courteous, but there was a trace of falsehood in that courteousness. Chu Xiu said with a smile that was not a smile, Master Yi, you and I can be considered old acquaintances. There's no need to play such tricks, right? You should know why I'm here. You also know that I don't have the energy to attend a banquet. The northern Yen side is on fire. Bushuan smiled bitterly. Official Chu, it's not that the Sixth Demon Sect does not want to help, but we are in the South Sea. The South Sea is close to the southern barbarians. When the news came, do you know who came? Chu Xiu's heart stirred. Rama? Bushuan smiled bitterly. It's Rama. Damn, the other party couldn't find the location of the Sixth Demon Sect, so he directly branded a Buddhist seal on the sea. That power was like burning the sky and boiling the sea. One Buddhist seal evaporated who knows how much seawater. For a whole 3 days, the Sixth Demon Sect was shrouded in mist. My Sixth Heavenly Demon Sect hasn't even made a move yet, but Rama has already come to warn us. If my Sixth Heavenly Demon Sect really makes a move, I reckon that before we can even reach Northern Yen, we will be dealt with by the people from Sabodhi Monastery. Chu Xiu frowned slightly. This was the current situation in the pugilistic world. The righteous and the demonic were entangled. The righteous martial artists in West Chu wanted to make a move, but he found the moon-worshipping sect to stop them. In the south, the sixth demon sect also wanted to help, but they were threatened by the Subodhi monastery. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "I know Master Yi's difficulties, so this time, I don't expect the sixth demon sect to make a move. I came to find you, Master Yi, to ask for a small favor." Hearing that Chu Xiu didn't force the sixth demon sect to make a move, Yibushuan let out a sigh of relief. He asked, "What does official Chu want from me?" "It's very simple. I want you to accompany me to the East Sea, Master Yi. There's no hope for the Central Plains warriors for the time being, so I want to borrow the power of the overseas martial artists to deal a fatal blow to the Eastern Qi. As long as the Eastern Qi retreats, everything will be easy to solve. However, I don't know much about the overseas forces, so I can only ask for your help, Master Yi. The South Sea and the East Sea are both seas. As for the overseas forces, it's more reliable to find someone like Master Yi who is familiar with them." Yi Bushuan smiled bitterly. The South Sea and the East Sea are very different. However, I have been to the East Sea several times. Although I don't know much about it, I have a general understanding. It's possible to go with official Chu this time. However, official Chu, I still advise you to be more cautious. Even if you go to the East Sea, it's very likely that you'll return empty-handed. The overseas martial artists rarely get involved in the affairs of the Central Plains. If you want them to rashly come to the Central Plains and make an enemy of a big country like the Eastern Qi, it'll be very difficult. Chu Xiu squinted and said, "They didn't come before because they didn't have enough benefits. Jiangshan Pavilion is doing well in the overseas forces. Why do they want to return to the Central Plains now? Isn't it because they have enough benefits? Master Yi, just lead the way. I'll take care of everything else. Even if it's difficult, we still have to try. If we don't try, how will we know it's not possible?" Since Chu Xiu didn't want to listen to his advice, he didn't say much. He just took it as a wasted trip. The overseas martial arts world and the Central Plains warriors were basically two different regions. Although Chu Xiu had a great reputation among the Central Plains warriors, it might not be effective in the overseas forces. Chapter 1004. The East Sea was very different from the South Sea. The biggest difference was the number of people. There were many storms in the South Sea, the climate was hot, and the environment was harsh. Therefore, the powers that could take root in the South Sea were all relatively strong, like the sixth demon sect, so their numbers were naturally much lower. The East Sea, on the other hand, had a pleasant climate and abundant heaven-earth yuan qi. There were countless islands of various sizes, including commoners and martial artists. A long time ago, someone had even established a country in the East Sea. Unfortunately, there were too many variables in the East Sea, and they didn't last long before being destroyed. At present, a portion of the East Sea's powers were in the hands of sects and aristocratic families, while the other portion was in the hands of individual powerhouses. They controlled an island and became lords, but they usually didn't last long. There were very few that could last for 3 generations, and those that could last for more than 3 generations would naturally become sects or aristocratic families. For the sake of speed, Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan directly took a boat to the East Sea. The 6th Heavenly Demon Sect's ship was reinforced by a formation, so its speed in the sea was faster than that of a martial artist at the true fire spirit refinement realm. Most importantly, it saved energy and didn't need to stop. Otherwise, even if a true fire spirit refinement realm martial artist could draw in the power of heaven and earth for their own use, they still wouldn't be able to walk on the water for a long time. As they neared the East Sea, Chu Xiu asked, "Master Yi, in the East Sea, who is the most powerful and influential person?" Yi Bushuan said, "Official Chu wants to make a move on the most influential person? That's not a bad idea. The East Sea has as many islands as there are hairs on an ox, and the various powers are also as numerous as hairs on an ox. However, the strongest person in the East Sea isn't actually the most influential. This is different from the Central Plains. Chu Xiao was surprised. Oh? Why? Yi Buxuan shook his head. I'm not too sure, but it's been like this for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps it's because the martial artists born in the East Sea saw the boundless ocean when they were born. Their hearts yearned for the heavens and earth, but they yearned for power. Therefore, over the years, the most powerful people in the East Sea were all martial arts fanatics, and it was rare to see them. For example, the current #1 unrestrained Sky Lord Wuxia Xianxia was such a person. Everyone only knew that he lived in the deepest part of the East Sea, but no one had ever seen him before. And that sword saint of the East Sea, Kong Dongming. Official Chu, you should have dealt with him before and know his strength. This guy is the same. Chu Xiao muttered, in that case, none of the most powerful people in the East Sea are in the heaven and earth elemental enlightenment realm? Yi Buxuan nodded and said, that's right. Moreover, the land of the Eastern Sea was roughly divided into two regions. One was the sea near the Eastern Qi land, called the Breezy Sea. There were many islands there, and the wind and waves were relatively mild. It was more suitable for the common people and martial artists to live in. The deeper part of the sea was called the Breezy Sea. There were often howling winds and waves, and the smaller islands would be submerged. Only the truly large islands and powerful martial artists could survive there. The environment there was even worse than in the South Sea. Therefore, official Chu basically didn't have to consider the forces in the Breezy Sea. The forces on the large islands there were self-sufficient, and they were too far away from Eastern Qi. They wouldn't be easily moved. There were many forces in the Breezy Sea, and most of them had trade with Eastern Qi. Some even traveled between the Central Plains and overseas. These people are worth considering. Then who is the strongest person in the Breezy Sea? Supreme Island Lord, God I Huixingzuan, the fifth Lord Hua. Yi Buxuan didn't even hesitate and spat out the name. He's very strong, and his force is also very strong. Since he dared to name his island Supreme Island, was he really going to be the master of the overseas region? At this moment, a strange expression appeared on Yi Buxuan's face as he said, although he is also at the true fire spirit refinement realm, his strength isn't too great. Not to mention the fact that he's already old, even when he was young, he was still a mediocre person in the same realm. At the very least, I don't fear him at all. Strictly speaking, his force isn't very strong. There aren't many forces that belong to him, but the forces that are indirectly related to him can dominate the Breezy Sea. Chu Xiao suddenly became interested in this fifth Lord Hua. The composition of the overseas region is quite interesting. Someone like this can dominate a sea region as large as the Breezy Sea? Yi Buxuan said, the main reason why Huixingzuan has the power he has today is because of his foresight. Huixingzuan's nickname is God's Eye. This God's Eye doesn't refer to the fact that he cultivates some kind of eye technique that can shock the world and make the gods weep. Instead, it refers to the way he looks at people. Moreover, people call him Fifth Master Hua not because he ranks fifth, but because he has 5 godson. At this point, Yi Buxuan clicked his tongue inside. When I first heard about this, even I sighed. This fifth Master Hua was either a grandmaster proficient in the Tao of divination, or he really had some kind of treasure on him. His eyes were simply too divine. None of Huixingzuan's descendants are successful, but he has adopted 5 godson, and all of them are dragons and phoenixes among men. His eldest godson, sword maniac, Qiu Tianya, is a master in the way of the sword. 50 years ago, he had already stepped into the true fire spirit refinement realm and was invincible in the Breezy Sea. If Kong Dongming had been born 50 years earlier, the title of Sword Saint of the Eastern Sea would not have fallen on his head. However, Qiu Tianya was a sword maniac and liked to test his swordsmanship. There was no one in the Breezy Sea who could match him, so he went to the Windbreaker Sea. It was said that he defeated several island lords of the large islands. In the end, he even went to challenge Zhongshunxiu. However, there was no trace of him since then. Many people said that even if he did not die at the hands of Zhongshunxiu, he was buried in the Boundless Sea region. Huoxingzuan's second godson is the Island Lord of Divine Weapon Island. He is at the peak of the true fire spirit refinement realm and is known as the #1 general of the Eastern Sea, Bailey Paubing. He uses his body to fight against divine weapons. Divine Weapon Island is not a place for forging divine weapons, but for burying divine weapons. His third godson is the largest fleet in the Eastern Sea, the master of the Blue Dragon Fleet, Fu Longshao. He is at the peak of the true fire spirit refinement realm. In the entire Breezy Sea, only his Blue Dragon Fleet can safely travel between the Breezy Sea and the Windbreaker Sea without a single accident. His fourth godson is Nalan Hai. He is also at the true fire spirit refinement realm. However, he is a bit unlucky. In his early years, he had a conflict with Kong Dongming. As a result, his legs were cut off by Kong Dongming. Now, he is living in seclusion on a small island. A true fire spirit refinement realm martial artist without legs. Although his cultivation is still there, his combat power will be greatly reduced. As for his fifth godson, you should know about Official Chu. He is the current pavilion master of Jiangshan Pavilion, Zhao Yuanfeng. I heard that he has become the regent of Wei country. When Jiangshan Pavilion first came to the overseas region, it was basically a stray dog. It even had a conflict with some overseas forces, including the forces under the 5th Lord Hua. Zhao Yuanfeng was still very young at that time. He was not the person in charge of Jiangshan Pavilion yet. However, he dared to go to the Supreme Island alone to negotiate with the 5th Lord Hua. He was valued by the 5th Lord Hua. Not only did he end the conflict between them, but he also recognized Zhao Yuanfeng as his godson. The reason why Jiangshan Pavilion is able to establish itself in the overseas region is not only because of Zhao Yuanfeng's efforts, but also because of the 5th Lord Hua's reputation. Chu Xiu was shocked when he heard Yi Bushuan telling him about the 5th Lord Hua. He had never heard of such a person before. He was lucky to have a big shot as his godson. However, if he was lucky to have 5 godson, then the 5th Lord Hua's luck must be off the charts. It was no wonder people called him the God's Eye. His ability to judge people was almost godly. However, Chu Xiu suddenly thought of something. He said in surprise, "I remember that Kong Dongming used to be a guest of Jiangshan Pavilion. He even crippled the leg of Huoxingzuan's third godson. They must have a deep grudge against each other. Why would Jiangshan Pavilion still dare to use him?" Yi Bushuan chuckled and said, "Official Chu, you fought with Kong Dongming before. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he's the strongest person in the Jianghu below the metaphysic realm of heaven and earth, right?" Chu Xiu nodded. That kind of monster was certainly not an exaggeration. He was the only freak he had ever seen who could step into the metaphysic realm of heaven and earth but did not take the initiative to do so. Yi Bushuan spread his hands and said, "In the entire Breezy Sea, Kong Dongming is almost invincible. The 5 godson of Huoxingzuan are indeed strong, but they can't do anything to the powerful Kong Dongming, who has no desires. Fighting him to the death would be the worst deal." Moreover, Zhao Yuanfeng was only Huoxingzuan's godson, not his biological son. Therefore, they didn't have much of a relationship with Nalan Hai. For a godson they had no relationship with, exchanging an almost invincible guest of the Breezy Sea, which was a good deal. Of course, in the entire Breezy Sea at that time, only Zhao Yuanfeng dared to use Kong Dongming as a guest. Zhao Yuanfeng was Huoxingzuan's 5th godson, so he didn't have to worry too much. However, the other forces were afraid of offending Nalan Hai and the 5th Lord Hua. Therefore, even if Kong Dongming took the initiative to come to them, they wouldn't dare to use him. Chu Xiu nodded in understanding. While they were talking, the giant ship had already arrived in the East Sea, heading straight for the largest island in the East Sea, Haotian Island. Haotian Island was the largest island in the entire East Sea, including the Breezy Sea and the Foam-splitting Sea. It was like a small piece of land. Haotian Island didn't belong to any force. Everyone could come to the island to trade, live, and so on. More than 10 famous Jianghu masters of the Breezy Sea and the major forces sent some elites to form an alliance to maintain the basic order of Haotian Island. Wuxia brought Chu Xiu to Haotian Island first to inquire about the news. After all, he was from the South Sea. It had been several years since he last came to the East Sea. He didn't know if the situation in the East Sea had changed. Chapter 1005. As soon as Chu Xiu and Wuxia arrived on Haotian Island, they could feel the difference between this place and the Central Plains warriors. The biggest difference was not the attire, language, etc., but the atmosphere. Most of the Central Plains warriors were from sects and aristocratic families. Most of the people who came and went were also in cliques. Moreover, in the East Sea, sects and aristocratic families were a part of it. There were also some islands that were loosely allied. There were also many independent martial artists who came and went between the islands. Therefore, it became a spectacle. Almost everywhere, you could see martial artists trading all kinds of natural treasures and even secret manuals of martial arts. Some of the things that the Central Plains warriors thought couldn't be taught casually could be bought here as long as you could pay the right price. Naturally, information was also available. Moreover, the overseas anemophilia didn't have any integrity. At least the wind-sweeping tower would be a little particular. Some secret items would only be sold to one person. Moreover, in the overseas region, as long as you could afford it, they wouldn't dare to say anything. Chu Xiu followed Wuxia to a long street on Haotian Island. They found a shop with a sign hanging on it and walked in directly. There were many people inside asking for all kinds of information. Chu Xiu looked around and said faintly, "Do you have a private room?" "Yes, yes." A crafty-looking martial artist immediately came forward and flattered Chu Xiu and Wuxia into a private room. He only had the strength of the innate realm. Naturally, he couldn't see through Chu Xiu and Wuxia's realm. However, in the anemophilia trade, whether it was the Central Plains warriors or overseas, it depended on their eyesight. Anyway, with his eyesight, these two were not ordinary people. "What kind of information do you need?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "All the major news that happened in the cool breeze sea in the past few years." The wind medium said awkwardly, "You're making things difficult for me. The breeze sea is so big, and from our anemophilia's point of view, there are major events happening every day." "What level are these major events?" Chu Xiu didn't say anything. He took out an ingot of purple gold and threw it on the table. Seeing that ingot of purple gold, the wind medium's eyes immediately lit up, and he put it into his bosom. He took out a thick book from somewhere and said, "What information do you want?" "I have it here." Purple gold was something that was extremely rare in the outer seas. There were very few purple gold mines in the outer seas. Even if there were, a portion of it was under the sea, and it was extremely difficult to mine it. Therefore, the purchasing power of purple gold in the outer seas was much higher than in the Central Plains. Chu Xiu was so generous. He could even find information from 100 years ago, not to mention all the news that happened in the past few years. Chu Xiu and Wuxia flipped through the book for a while, and they more or less understood the situation in the outer seas. Compared to the ups and downs of the Central Plains warriors, the outer seas was still relatively peaceful. Huixingzuan had a great reputation in the outer seas. In addition, he had a few foster sons. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his supreme island was the supreme island of the outer seas. Everyone else lived under such authority and rules. Naturally, they wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Bo Sun closed the book and said, "This fifth Master Huo will be celebrating his 380th birthday in a few days. He is also a person who loves to show off and has a lively personality. Every few years, he will hold a birthday celebration and call his adopted son as well as all the major powers in the Cool Breeze Sea to come and have a good time. It can be said that this is the time when all the forces in the Breezy Sea are gathered. On such an occasion, official Chu, if you can get the support of the Fifth Lord Hua and gather all the forces in the Breezy Sea, it might be possible. Hearing what Wuxia said, Chu Xiu's expression was a little strange. This Hua Xingzuan was already 380 years old. There weren't many true fire spirit refinement realm martial artists who could live to this age. In theory, a martial artist in the true fire spirit refinement realm had a lifespan of 400 years, but this was only in theory. Once a martial artist in this realm passed the age of 200, his body would begin to decline. In fact, at 300 years old, one could already feel that they were close to the end of their lifespan. It was already very rare for someone to survive 300 years old and still have the strength to fight, like the Chunyang Dao sect's Mako Mori. This Fifth Lord Hua was already close to 400 years old, but he was still able to go through so much trouble. He could be considered to have lived a long life. Wuxia seemed to have seen through Chu Xiu's doubts. He smiled and said, ever since his eldest foster son, Qiu Tianya, became famous, the Fifth Lord Hua almost never fought with anyone. Later on, he took in 4 foster sons in a row. Do you think he still has the chance to fight with others? Chu Xiu nodded in understanding. This was very reasonable. This fifth Master Hua had lived like a prince for such a long time. With his 5 adopted sons around, he could practically do as he pleased in the entire Cool Breeze Sea. Without the opportunity to fight to the death with others, he naturally did not have as many internal injuries in his body. It was normal for him to have a longer lifespan. However, Chu Xiu still felt a little uncomfortable. He was more sensitive about things like birthday banquets. Generally speaking, as long as he participated in a birthday banquet, it would not end well. He also wondered if he was suffering from the reverse fate of occasions like birthday banquets. However, this time, Chu Xiu was really going to join forces with people from overseas. He was not going to look for trouble. Therefore, Chu Xiu asked the Anemophilia, "Do you know what the Fifth Lord Hua likes? What did the major forces of the breezy ocean give him during his birthday banquets?" The Anemophilia smiled bitterly and said, "With the Fifth Lord Hua's identity, what rare treasures can't he get? Moreover, the Fifth Lord Hua does not devote himself to martial arts. He doesn't care about cultivation manuals and the like. So, you've stumped me on this. Then how do you give him birthday gifts? Do you just give them randomly?" The Anemophilia shrugged and said helplessly, "Just give them whatever you want. Of course, we have to choose the precious ones." In fact, the martial arts forces of the breezy ocean also had some complaints about the Fifth Lord Hua holding birthday banquets frequently. Although the Fifth Lord Hua said that his birthday banquets were just for everyone to have fun together, even if he did not give gifts, who would dare to refuse? But since the old man said so, who would dare to not give gifts? Moreover, they could not give gifts lightly. If others give expensive gifts, you can give something light, but it also depends on the strength of your sect. Even if a small island owner just gave a calligraphy painting, the Fifth Lord Hua would not be picky. But if you, a big island owner, also gave a calligraphy painting, then the Fifth Lord Hua would not be happy even if he did not say it. Then, you would be out of luck. Everyone is competing with each other to give gifts, and none of the forces dare to hide their gifts. The expenses are not ordinary. Chu Xiu said with a faint smile, "Aren't you afraid that something will go wrong by slandering the Fifth Lord Hua here?" The Anemophilia chuckled and said, "The Fifth Lord Hua will not care about an ant-like person like me. Moreover, these things are being discussed in the entire breezy ocean, so there is no way we can control them all. But if the 2 of you want to attend the Fifth Lord Hua's birthday banquets, you'd better think of a way to get an invitation." Chu Xiu asked doubtfully, "Can't anyone attend the birthday banquets?" "Anyone can attend the birthday banquets, but do the two of you know how many forces there are in the entire breezy ocean, and how many lone cultivators there are? On the day of the birthday banquets, the entire Supreme Island will be packed. Most people can only have a banquet outside, and they are not qualified to enter the inner house at all. Only those who have less than 1,000 invitations are qualified to enter the inner house and see the fifth Lord Hua. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and asked, "Then how can I get an invitation?" The Anemophilia said, "There is nothing I can do about that. The invitations are sent to the leaders of the various forces, and no one will sell them. However, one invitation can bring 3 people. Some loose cultivators are alone, so they will help their juniors, or directly sell their spots. You can all give it a try." Recently, a great-grandson of the fifth Lord Hua has been giving out invitations on the Haotian Island. You can try your luck there and see if you can get one. Of course, it will be very difficult. The invitations are limited, and even if that person is the great-grandson of the fifth Lord Hua, he won't dare to do anything. Chu Xiu nodded and left with Yi Buxuan. As long as he had some clues, it would be easy to get an invitation. Chu Xiu first went to the place where the great-grandson of the fifth Lord Hua was with Yi Buxuan. The Haotian Island was jointly managed by various forces, and the Supreme Island naturally had a part in it. At the moment, in a house, a young man in a brocade robe was holding a pen and paper, and he was giving out invitations one by one. To be more precise, it was the people who were invited to the birthday party who went up to him to confirm their identities, and then went to him to get the invitations. In the past, it was usually the host's family who came to deliver the invitations, but the great-grandson of the fifth Lord Hua was too lazy to go from house to house, so he stayed on the Haotian Island and called everyone over to get the invitations himself. When someone came, he would cross off the name on the list. It was easy and effortless. But even so, he still reprimanded impatiently, "Hurry up. What are you waiting for? I'm waiting here to give you invitations on such a hot day, and you're still dilly-dallying? Even the old turtle in the sea is faster than you." Hearing that, the faces of the sect leaders and island masters darkened, but they didn't act up. After all, the person was the great-grandson of the fifth Lord Hua, and he was even a direct descendant. It was said that the fifth Lord Hua doted on him, so they couldn't afford to offend him. But seeing this scene, Chu Xiu shook his head. Some powerful island masters were definitely personally sent invitations by the Supreme Island's higher-ups, but the strength of the people present wasn't weak either. At least among those who came to get the invitations, there were many real pellet state, and the weakest was at the unity of man and nature state. But the great-grandson of the fifth Lord Hua was only at the physical invulnerability state. Although with Chu Xiu's current realm, a real pellet state could be easily killed with a slap. But in the eyes of most martial artists, the grandmaster of the real pellet state was already an unattainable existence. In the Central Plains warriors, they could establish their own sects, and in the overseas land, they could also dominate an island. But now, they were humiliated by this young man. This was simply ruining the Supreme Island's reputation. Chapter 1006. Yi Buxuan also saw the behavior of the fifth Lord Hua's great-grandson. He shook his head and said, "The fifth Lord Hua's vision is amazing, but it's a pity that none of his descendants live up to expectations. They are all mediocre, and it's not uncommon for them to have a bad reputation like this. But he still has 5 adopted sons, which is enough to protect the entire Supreme Island." Seeing the appearance of Hua Xingzuan's great-grandson, Chu Xiu was even more curious about the fifth Lord Hua. The other party's vision is simply amazing. He has 5 adopted sons in a row, and each of them is outstanding. But his method of educating his descendants is a bit too mediocre. Looking at his behavior, he is even inferior to those of the 9 great families in the Central Plains. At this moment, there was a sudden quarrel outside, and there was even a faint sound of exploding aura. Chu Xiu and Yi Buxuan went out to take a look. It turned out to be 2 real pellet state martial artists fighting fiercely on the street. A group of people around were watching as if they were used to this kind of situation. It should be said that this kind of situation was very common on Haotian Island. This was not the territory of one family, and any disputes could be resolved directly on the island. Of course, both sides had to control the strength of their attacks. Otherwise, if they hurt the innocent, someone would intervene. The two real pellet state martial artists who were fighting were one old and one young. The young man looked like he was in his early 30s, and his actual age should be less than 50 years old. His talent was very good. However, he had obviously just stepped into the real pellet state not long ago, and he was inferior to the old man opposite him. He was already at a disadvantage. The young martial artist said hatefully, "Lin Tsung-yip. In the past, you were chased by your enemies like a stray dog. It was my father who saved you and let you join the Long Gorge Island. Now that my father is dead, you can't wait to take my Long Gorge Island. Do you have any shame? You're simply unscrupulous." Lin Tsung-yip sneered, "Xiao Ziki, don't talk like you are so wronged. After so many years, who is the reason why the Long Gorge Island can grow to such a scale? It's me. You, Mr. Xiao, used the forces I fought for and the resources and elixirs I earned to cultivate behind closed doors. Without me, can you have the strength you have now? Your father saved my life. When he was alive, I regarded him as my master. But now that he is gone, what right do you have to be the island master?" The enmity between these two people was very simple. Chu Xiu had already figured it out long ago. It was nothing more than their own family's infighting. This Lin Zongye plotted to seize the foundation left behind by Xiao Ziki's father. He believed that his contribution was greater than Xiao Ziki's, and that the position of island master should belong to him. On the other hand, Ziki thought that he was a traitor to Xiao Xiao was a traitor to. Actually, both of them were not wrong. Every man for himself, and heaven and earth would destroy him. Who was right and who was wrong when it came to conflicts of interest? Lin Tsung-yip said coldly, "Hand over the invitation. You don't have to go to the Fifth Lord Hua's birthday banquet anymore. I'll do it for you." Only the leaders of the major forces were qualified to go to the Supreme Island to celebrate Hua Xingzuan's birthday banquet. This person used to be Xiao Ziki's father. Now, it was naturally him. Hence, the invitation was given to him. It must be said that Hua Xingzuan's prestige in the breezy ocean had reached a certain level. Even attending his birthday banquet had become a symbol of status. However, Chu Xiu's heart skipped a beat. An invitation? Xiao Ziki said coldly, "Dream on." Moreover, the Xiao family's name is written on the invitation. Even if you have the invitation, you won't be able to go to the Supreme Island. A strange smile appeared on Lin Zongye's face. Is that so? But it's very common for the ruler of an island to change. I believe the Hua family will understand. Am I right, young Master Hua? The young master of the Hua family, who had been handing out the invitations in the courtyard, was now standing at the side watching the commotion. Hearing this, he only said lazily, "Old Lin, don't forget to bring me 72 clear dust pearls when you come to the island. If you bring something, I will recognize the invitation. If you don't, even if you bring 100 invitations, it will be useless." When everyone heard this, they immediately knew what was going on. Lin Tsung-yip was really well prepared. He had already hooked up with the young master of the Hua family. Although the name of the invitation was wrong, which was against the rules, the disciples of the Supreme Island might not take it seriously since the young master Hua had spoken. At this moment, Xiao Ziki's heart was filled with despair. Lin Tsung-yip had already planned everything. Was the foundation that his father left behind going to be lost just like that? But suddenly, a voice was heard. "If I help you get rid of this old man, how about you bring the two of us when you go to the Supreme Island?" Everyone immediately looked at Chu Xiu and Ibuxuan when they heard the voice. Chu Xiu and Ibuxuan naturally wouldn't flaunt their true fire spirit refinement state aura when they went to the island. Instead, they concealed their aura. However, people like Xiao Ziki and Lin Tsungyip could tell that Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan weren't simple at all, because even they couldn't see through them. Therefore, Xiao Ziki didn't even consider the background of Chu Xiu and the others. He immediately said, "If the two of you can help me, I'll give you anything you want." His family's business was about to be taken away. As long as the other party didn't want his life, he was willing to give them anything they wanted. Lin Tsungyip squinted his eyes and said, "People of the Central Plains, this is an overseas dispute. It's best that you don't interfere." The clothes that Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan were wearing were very different from those of the overseas martialists. Coupled with their accents, it was easy to tell that they were from the Central Plains. Lin Tsungyip's tone was filled with fear and threat. However, his heart skipped a beat when he saw the look in Chu Xiu's eyes. This was because Chu Xiu's eyes looked as if he was looking at a dead man. Before Lin Tsungyip could speak, Chu Xiu had already used his palm as a blade and slashed out gently. A wisp of black fire condensed in Chu Xiu's blade. It seemed very weak and tiny, and it didn't even emit any energy fluctuations. However, at this moment, the terrifying instinct of being in a life-and-death situation made Lin Tsungyip erupt with all his strength. He even burned his essence and blood to resist the weak black fire. However, this was still in vain. That black flame easily burned through his protective Zhenqi and touched his body. In an instant, his entire body was burned into a pile of ashes, leaving no bones behind. Everyone present suddenly fell into silence. They couldn't believe that a martial arts grandmaster of the real Pellet state died so easily in the hands of the opponent. Everyone present couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts, even Yi Bushuan was the same. He was an old man in the demonic path. He had dealt with both Ming Mo and Yin Mo. Most of the people in the demonic path were paranoid and crazy. No matter what they did, it wasn't too much. Therefore, when Yi Bushuan first met Chu Xiu, he actually didn't feel that Chu Xiu was a demonic cultivator. Because although Chu Xiu was ruthless, his opponents were all his enemies. Moreover, Chu Xiu didn't have any strange dark hobbies like other demonic cultivators, nor did he rape, pillage, or kill his enemies. But now Yi Bushuan understood that in the entire demonic path, perhaps he, Chu Xiu, was the person with the deepest demonic nature. Originally, this matter had nothing to do with him. However, because of the invitation, he had jumped out to kill someone. From this, it could be seen what exactly human life represented in Chu Xiu's heart. Perhaps, to him, human life was just a tool, a stepping stone. That was the most terrifying thing, because you didn't know when you would have a conflict of interest with Chu Xiu one day. At that time, he wouldn't kill you so easily. At this time, in the silence, a discordant voice suddenly sounded, "Hey, you killed old Lin, what about the Mingchen bead he promised to give me? Are you going to compensate me?" The young master of the Hua family spoke first, and there was even extreme dissatisfaction in his tone. The others might be shocked by Chu Xiu's strength, but he wasn't. Since he was young, he had been surrounded by too many strong cultivators. The foster sons of his ancestors were not easy to deal with. Hearing this voice, Chu Xiu frowned. When he looked over, his eyes seemed to be nurturing a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was extremely terrifying. The young master of the Hua family was shocked, and he didn't dare to say another word. But at this time, an old man with the strength of true fire spirit refinement realm walked over from afar. The others all respectfully called him Yu, I, Feng. This was one of the current managers of Haotian Island. He was a lone cultivator, but his seniority in terms of seniority was very high. Feng didn't say anything. He only released his own aura and said calmly, "When the strong cultivators of the Central Plains come to our East Sea, the people of the East Sea are warm and hospitable, and we will definitely treat them well. However, if they kill people as soon as they come, we don't dare to treat them well even if we want to." As he said that, Feng's body released a powerful pressure that attacked Chu Xiu. However, a powerful pressure that was 10 times or even 100 times stronger than the previous one descended, causing Feng's eyes to bulge. In less than 3 breaths' time, he couldn't bear the pressure anymore. He shook his head and said, "There are talented people in every generation. I'm old." After saying that, Feng actually turned around and left. Before he left, he said calmly, "There aren't many rules on Haotian Island. When it comes to personal grievances, death is death. However, don't think that anyone can act recklessly on Haotian Island. The East Sea isn't a place where anyone can act recklessly." Chu Xiu was famous among the Central Plains warriors. However, in the East Sea, or rather, in the eyes of a semi-retired martial artist like Feng, he didn't have much of an impression. However, regardless of whether it was the Central Plains or overseas, strength was the best proof of everything. Just that aura alone was enough to make him feel that even if he had been at his peak when he was young, he probably wouldn't have been able to withstand 3 moves from this person before him. Chapter 1007. Strength was the most useful passport, no matter where one was. The Haotian Island was loosely managed. The rules might be useful to others, but to people like Chu Xiu, they were basically useless. Thus, Elder Feng only left a few pleasantries before disappearing. Even the young master of the Hua family dejectedly returned to continue sending out invitations. He no longer felt the heartache over the clear dust pearl that he had yet to obtain. Xiao Ziki came over and cupped his hands in gratitude. "Thank you, Senior, for helping me get rid of this traitor. I am very grateful." Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, "You don't have to be so polite. It's just a deal. Don't forget what you promised me." Xiao Ziki nodded and said, "Don't worry, I will take the 2 of you to the 5th Lord Hua's birthday celebration in a few days." In fact, Xiao Ziki was also very puzzled. He could see that the 2 of them were experts in the true fire spirit refining realm. There were only a few experts at this level in the overseas region. Why would such people come to the 5th Lord Hua's birthday celebration? Could it be that the 5th Lord Hua's reputation was so great that it could affect the experts in the Central Plains? Although Xiao Ziki was puzzled, he did not ask much. He just invited Chu Xiu and Ibuxuan to wait at his residence. At this time, Ibuxuan suddenly asked Chu Xiu through voice transmission, "Official Chu, I don't think there's anything special about this Xiao Ziki. Why did you choose to help him instead of Lin Tsungyip? Is it because you hate traitors, Official Chu?" Ibuxuan could see that Chu Xiu had killed someone casually because of the invitation. Therefore, it didn't matter who he killed just now. If he helped Lin Tsungyip kill Xiao Ziki, he would still get the invitation. Chu Xiu shook his head gently and said, "I don't hate traitors. In fact, many people in the Jianghu say that I, Chu Xiu, am a traitor. It's not the first time I've betrayed my master. Although I don't hate traitors, I don't want to cooperate with idiots." Lin Tsungyip was too useless. He thought himself clever and was greedy. According to him, he had been in charge of all the affairs of the Long Gorge Island for so many years, while Xiao Ziki only focused on cultivation. Therefore, even if he was not the island lord, his prestige must be higher than Xiao Ziki's. This matter could have been carried out step by step. He could have secretly schemed to make the entire Long Gorge Island fall out with Xiao Ziki and ruin his reputation. Then, he would be forced to become the island lord. But in the end, Lin Tsungyip insisted on taking it by force. Obviously, he was a greedy and stupid guy. All humans are greedy. I can cooperate with greedy people, and I can tolerate greed, but I can't tolerate a greedy idiot. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Ibuxuan broke out in a cold sweat. Lin Tsungyip was lucky to have met Xiao Ziki, a guy who only had strength but had no experience in scheming. If he had met Chu Xiu, he would have been cheated until not even his bones were left. Of course, not even his bones were left now. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. I didn't expect to meet the famous official Chu in the East Sea, as well as sect leader Ibushuan of the Sixth Demon Sect. What an honor. Chu Xiao and Ibushuan both looked back in surprise. They didn't expect someone to recognize them in a place like this. The speaker was a middle-aged man in purple with an extraordinary aura. This middle-aged man also had the strength of the true fire spirit refinement realm. His aura was condensed and abnormally dense. Seeing Chu Xiao and Ibushuan, he greeted them with cupped hands. Every move he made was filled with a sense of grandeur. Before Chu Xiao and Ibushuan could ask, the man took the initiative and said, "I am Pak Donglai. I run some small businesses in the East Sea. It's normal that you haven't heard of me." Ibushuan smiled and said, "Tianyishui Hall Pavilion Master, Purple Air from the East, Pak Donglai is famous. Who doesn't know of him? Moreover, if Tianyishui Hall is only a small business, then all the shops in the East Sea can only be described as street stalls." As Ibushuan said this, he secretly introduced Pak Donglai to Chu Xiao. This person was born in the wilderness. In his early years, he brought a few small boats to the Windbreaker Sea in search of treasures and opportunities. After he accumulated some savings, he built Tianyishui Hall on various islands in the East Sea. He sold all kinds of rare treasures, weapons, elixirs, cultivation methods, ancient books, and so on. At the same time, he also bought some resources from rogue cultivators. Because Pak Donglai's Tianyishui Hall was fair and honest, even when he bought some items from rogue cultivators, he would try his best to give a higher price. Therefore, in the East Sea, Pak Donglai had a good reputation. Moreover, he was a righteous person. If anyone encountered difficulties and asked for help from Tianyishui Hall, as long as it was not too excessive, the Tianyishui Hall on each island would help as much as possible. Although there were some people who took advantage of him, most people were grateful to him. In short, this person was also a big shot in the East Sea. Pak Donglai asked, "Both of you are big shots in the Central Plains warriors. May I know why you have come to the East Sea this time?" Chu Xiao smiled and said, "I have long heard of the name of the fifth Lord Hua of the East Sea Supreme Island. This time, we have come to congratulate the fifth Lord Hua on his birthday." Pak Donglai only smiled and said, "That's great. I will also attend the fifth Lord Hua's birthday. We will see you then. If the two of you don't mind, after the fifth Lord Hua's birthday, you can also come to my Tianyishui Hall as a guest." After exchanging some pleasantries, Pak Donglai turned and left. After Pak Donglai left, Ibushuan asked, "Official Chu, what do you think of this person?" Chu Xiao said calmly, "He seems to be generous and forthright, but in fact, he is very thoughtful and knows his limits." They were both experienced and astute people. Pak Donglai might be able to deceive others, but he could not deceive Chu Xiao. Since the other party knew them, he should have noticed Chu Xiao when Chu Xiao stood out to kill people. In the end, he only came out after Chu Xiao killed the people and Feng was scared away. He pretended to be surprised and did not want to get involved in trouble. Moreover, Chu Xiao said that he had only come to celebrate the fifth Lord Hua's birthday. Even an idiot would not believe him. If Pak Donglai was really generous and forthright, he would definitely flick his sleeves and leave on the spot. However, he seemed to really believe it and did not even say a word of doubt. Moreover, he could also guess that Chu Xiao was wary of him. Therefore, after exchanging a few pleasantries, he turned around and left. He did not continue to be entangled here. That was why Chu Xiao said that he knew his limits. Ibushuan said with a smile, "Pak Donglai has a good reputation in this area of the Breeze Sea. I don't think many people will believe what you said about him." Chu Xiao said expressionlessly, "Those who really believe in it are either those inexperienced youths, or they're really stupid. Pak Donglai has such strength now and his Tianyishui Hall has such influence now. If this person is not scheming enough, I'm afraid he would have been tricked to death long ago." Although that was what he said, Chu Xiao did not care about Pak Donglai. He did not have any enmity towards Chu Xiu and Ibuxuan. He was just curious and testing them out. He wanted to make friends with them. The two of them were big shots among the Central Plains warriors. In particular, Chu Xiu had suddenly come to the East Sea. As long as someone recognized them, it would definitely arouse suspicion. Therefore, it was not strange for Pak Donglai to test them out. Moreover, for people like Pak Donglai, networking and other things had almost become a habit. When he met Chu Xiu and Ibuxuan, two experts who did not have a direct conflict of interest with him, he subconsciously wanted to get to know them. Even if he could not help him, it was still good to have such connections. The two of them followed Xiao Ziki to his residence on Haotian Island. A few days later, when the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua began, they were ready to leave. During this period of time, Xiao Ziki had indeed suspected that Chu Xiu and Ibuxuan insisted on attending the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua. He wondered if they had ulterior motives and whether they would implicate him. However, Xiao Ziki dared not ask or say these things. If it were not for Chu Xiu, his foundation would have been occupied by Lin Tsungyip. Of course, the most important thing was that based on how easily Chu Xiu killed Lin Tsungyip as if he was crushing an ant, Xiao Ziki had no doubt that he would end up the same if he did anything. Before Xiao Ziki reached the real pellet state, his father told him that as long as he broke through to the real pellet state, he could become the overlord of an island. Now that he had reached the real pellet state, he found that in the face of a powerhouse like Chu Xiu, the real pellet state was just a slightly stronger ant. This truth even made Xiao Ziki lose his mind for a while. The big ship was approaching the Supreme Island, and there were many ships heading towards the Supreme Island. They were obviously preparing to celebrate the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua. After going ashore, Chu Xiu also sized up the Supreme Island. The Supreme Island wasn't too big, but the scenery was beautiful, and the qi of heaven and earth was extremely abundant. It could be said to be a treasure land. The buildings on the island were extremely luxurious. In Chu Xiu's opinion, they were even more luxurious than the northern Yen. The building in the center of the island was no longer a house, but a small palace. With Xiao Ziki carrying the invitation, it was easy to enter the palace. However, at this time, Chu Xiu and the others didn't notice that there were several pairs of eyes watching them from the other side of the palace. The young master of the Hua family that Chu Xiu had met before was standing there. There were two other people standing beside him. One of them was dressed in battle armor and had a ferocious and fierce appearance. He gave off an intimidating feeling without being angry. There was another person who was even stranger. He was actually sitting cross-legged in the air, completely supported by his stellar energy. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that he was not maintaining such a strange posture. Instead, it was because he did not have legs. Chapter 1008. The people who were secretly observing Chu Xiu and the others were none other than Hua Xingzuan's second foster son, Bailey Paubing, the owner of Divine Weapon Island, and his fourth foster son, Naylan Hai. Bailey Paubing grabbed the Hua family's young master and brought him in front of him. He asked loudly, "Kid, you're saying that these two fellows deliberately killed people in order to attend foster father's birthday celebration? That's how they obtained the invitation?" Young Master Hua nodded and said, "That's right, it's the two of them. They seem to be some big shots of the Central Plains warriors." Bailey Paubing turned his gaze to Naylan Hai and asked, "The fourth prince, you usually like to study these messy news. You should know the Central Plains warriors the best. What's the background of these two fellas? Foster father's birthday is such a joyous occasion, we can't let them disturb it." Naylan Hai's appearance was that of a young man with a pale face. His hair was disheveled, but the gloominess in his eyes did not dissipate no matter what. The fifth Lord Hua's foster sons were all dragons and phoenixes among men. Naylan Hai used to be one, but now, he was a crippled dragon and phoenixes among men. Kong Dongming's strength was almost invincible among those below the heaven and earth mysterious realm. He was so powerful that it made people feel hopeless. Even if the fifth lord Hua's foster sons attacked him together, they might not be able to defeat him. Moreover, the fifth lord Hua's foster sons each had their own thoughts. They were all the fifth lord Hua's foster sons, but they were not brothers. For example, Zhao Yuanfeng knew that Kong Dongming had injured him, but he still dared to use Kong Dongming as his follower. Among the fifth lord Hua's foster sons, he was only close to Bailey Paubing. The young master Hua glanced at Naylan Hai cautiously. Of course, the fifth lord Hua's foster sons were all people he could not afford to offend. The fifth lord Hua treated them better than his own sons. However, young master Hua was not afraid of the ferocious Bailey Paubing. Instead, he was afraid of the taciturn Naylan Hai. Hearing this, Naylan Hai said indifferently, "Strictly speaking, the one in the black robe and mask is not a martial artist from the Central Plains. He is the leader of the sixth demon sect in the South China Sea, Yibuxian. As for that young man, if I'm not mistaken, he should be the strongest person in the Yinma clan on the surface. He is also its leader, the leader of the subduing martial hall, Chu Xiu. He is definitely a big shot in the Central Plains warriors. He is in charge of the Yinma clan, and all the forces in the northern Yan martial world regard him as the supreme leader. Although he is not the leader of the Guanzhong torture room in name, he is his puppet. One of the four spirits, the former leader of the Blue Dragon Society, Bu Tiannan, was killed. In the end, the Blue Dragon Society did not avenge him. Instead, it was controlled by the murderer. The information that Naylan Hai said was not new to the Central Plains warriors. Almost everyone knew about it. However, it was not easy to have such detailed information about Chu Xiu in the overseas area. Bailey Paubing was speechless. He said, "This guy has such a powerful background. The Yinma clan is not worried at all. How could they hand over such a big foundation to such a young man?" Naylan Hai squinted his eyes and said, "In the Jianghu, apart from distinguishing one's seniority, is there any other meaning to age? As long as one is powerful enough, what foundation can't he get? The fourth prince, I think this guy is up to no good when he comes to celebrate his godfather's birthday. He is a big shot of the devil path in the Central Plains. What is he doing in the East Sea? Anyway, none of the warriors in the Central Plains are good people. How about this, before the birthday celebration starts, I will find a reason to kick him out." In the past, before Bailey Paubing became the fifth lord Hua's adopted son, he had gone to the Central Plains to make a living. No one knew what happened at that time. However, it was said that Bailey Paubing suffered a great loss. Therefore, as long as he met warriors from the Central Plains, even if they did not provoke him, they would be easily beaten up by him. Naylan Hai glanced at him and said, "This is my godfather's birthday celebration. He hasn't done anything yet. What are you so anxious about? If you act rashly, the one who will be kicked out might not be Chu Xiu, but you. Keep an eye on him and observe the situation. Remember, this is the outer endless sea, the supreme island. This is our territory, not Chu Xiu's." Although that was what Naylan Hai said, he still had doubts in his heart. He remembered that Eastern Qi had already started to attack the Northern Yan. This Chu Xiu had close relations with the Northern Yan royalty. Even the Northern Yan royalty was helped onto the throne by him. Did he come to the East Sea have something to do with this? At that moment, Chu Xiu had already followed Xiao Ziki into the hall. It was an extraordinarily gorgeous hall, with tables and seats placed around it. However, Xiao Ziki was in a dilemma. There were only a limited number of true fire spirit refinement state experts in the breezy sea. Therefore, there were also a limited number of seats at the front that were specially prepared for true fire spirit refinement state experts. With Xiao Ziki's strength and influence, he could only sit in the middle. However, Chu Xiu and Yibuxian were genuine true fire spirit refinement state experts. Did they have to sit with him? Fortunately, this time, Chu Xiu was here to find someone to work with and not to look for trouble. Therefore, he did not argue over a seat. He simply said, "Sit down." About an hour later, the hall was filled with people. There were 5 seats at the front, but only 3 people were seated. Those 5 seats were naturally reserved for Huixingzuan's 5 adopted sons. Even his own sons did not have this kind of treatment. The first seat was already empty. It was reserved for his eldest son, Qiu Tianya. Although Qiu Tianya had been missing for 50 years, he still had a seat at Huixingzuan's birthday celebration. The second seat was the island master of Divine Weapon Island, Bailey Paubing. For some reason, Chu Xiu always felt that Bailey Paubing was looking at him. The third seat was the master of the Blue Dragon Fleet, Fu Longshao. This person wore a brocade robe with dragon patterns and had an imposing appearance. He was also the strongest among the 3. The fourth seat was Nalan Hai. However, he always had a kind of unapproachable aura, which made people fear him. The fifth seat was also empty now. This seat was naturally reserved for Zhao Yuanfeng. At this moment, a loud voice came from outside, "The fifth lord is here." As the voice came, an old man with white hair and beard, dressed in luxurious clothes, walked into the hall surrounded by a group of children and grandchildren. Hearing this voice, everyone present turned their eyes to the fifth Lord Hua. Even Chu Xiu's eyes were attracted. He was really curious about who this fifth Lord Hua was. His eyesight could actually reach such a level. However, at first glance, Chu Xiu was a little disappointed. Ordinary, too ordinary. For most martial artists, not to mention the true fire spirit refinement state, even the real pellet state was something that could only be encountered by chance. However, in the eyes of people at Chu Xiu's level, there were also differences in the true fire spirit refinement state. The Sun family's ancestor and the Lu family's ancestor who died in his hands before belonged to the mediocre type. Not long ago in the Guanzhong torture room, Meiko Mori, Nangong Weiyu, and Helian Changfeng were all defeated by him, but it was not because he was too weak, but because Chu Xiu was too strong. Individually, the 3 of them were not easy to deal with. On Huixingzuan, Chu Xiu did not see too many anomalies. On the contrary, in his opinion, this Huixingzuan was even a little weak. There was not much evil aura on his body, which proved that he had not fought with others for a long time. Even when his combat power was at its peak, he rarely fought with others, so his combat power should not be high. Moreover, Huixingzuan's body exuded an extremely strong aura. It was so strong that it was a little abnormal. This proved that he often used various elixirs and natural treasures as tonics, and the tonics were a little too much, even to the point that it was emitted through his aura. Also, the aura around his body was different from the ordinary true fire spirit refinement state martial artists. True fire spirit refinement state used the power of the spirit to trigger the power of heaven and earth. Every move was in line with the power of heaven and earth. This was a subconscious move. For example, if it was raining now, the existence of true fire spirit refinement state like Chu Xiu, even if he didn't use true qi to block the raindrops would involuntarily deviate and avoid them. However, the aura around Huixingzuan's body was very chaotic, as if he couldn't control this power at all. Could it be that even the power of the true fire spirit refinement realm was obtained from an external object? But what external objects could allow someone to step into true fire spirit refinement state? While Chu Xiu was thinking, Huixingzuan had already walked to the main seat and sat down. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Time passes really quickly. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, I would already be 380 years old. This birthday. Every time we celebrate it, we get older. In a few more years, perhaps everyone will have to attend Ai's funeral." Someone immediately said, "What are you talking about, Fifth Lord? The Eastern Sea is fortunate to have the protection of the Fifth Lord. The Fifth Lord will definitely live on for tens of thousands of years." That's right. All these years, the Fifth Lord has blessed the Eastern Sea. How could the heavens let the Fifth Lord leave just like that? The fifth lord will definitely have a long life of good fortune. A series of flattering words came from the audience. They sounded very mushy, but everyone knew that the fifth lord Hua actually loved to hear such words. When people get old, they all fear death, and Hua Xingzuan was even more so. Although he kept saying that he didn't have long to live, if someone said those unlucky words in front of him, he would be very unhappy. Waving his hand, Hua Xingzuan said with a smile, all right, I have already been blessed by the heavens for being able to live until now. If I continue living, I will really become an old man. Originally, I didn't plan to celebrate this birthday, and planned to celebrate it when I'm 388 years old. However, I'm afraid that I won't be able to see all of you after another 8 years. Therefore, I brought it forward a little so that I can have some fun with all of you. At this time, the third son of Hua Xingzuan, Fu Longshao, was the first to step forward. He bowed and said, "Don't worry, foster father. After 8 years, I will definitely hold an even bigger birthday banquet for you, and invite some of the powerful experts in the windbreaking sea." This time, I went to the windbreaking sea and brought back a sea bodhi. The fruit it bore was actually a longevity peach. Clearly, the heavens are preparing a congratulatory gift for you, foster father. With that, Fu Longshao waved his hand and ordered someone to bring the congratulatory gift. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu clearly noticed that Bailey Paubing and Nalan Hai's expressions had turned gloomy. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.